Rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. RMT boss Mick Lynch told GB News the union wants a sensible agreement that everyone can support.
The message is that we do apologise for the inconvenience and we are working towards getting a solution. But there are a lot of people that are frustrated. We've got the health workers, education workers, firefighters are all getting the same treatment from the government, that they seem to want to extend the agony and not give people a square deal. And all we want is a square deal for our members, and then we can create a settlement.
Concerns have been raised over a lack of basic cold and flu medications at Britain's pharmacies. The Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies is warning its members are running out of products such as throat lozenges and cough mixtures. They say the problems arise from a lack of planning by officials at the Department of Health. It comes after warnings that winter illnesses such as flu is circulating at high levels. Supermarket Sainsbury's has announced it's to increase wages for nearly 127,000 workers from February. Workers of both Sainsbury's and Argos will see increases from £10.25 to £11 outside London. Staff wages inside the capital will increase to nearly £12. The group said the measures were to help retain existing and attract new employees in a tight labour market. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. The British Retail Consortium says it was a challenging Christmas for many households across the UK. The British Museum says it's having constructive discussions over the possible return of the Elgin marbles to Greece. The 17 pieces, which make up 30% of the Parthenon sculptures of ancient Greece, were taken by Lord Elgin in the early 19th century. But the 2,500-year-old marbles could soon return to Athens as part of an exchange with the British Museum. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's over to Patrick Christys.
Yes, welcome aboard, everybody. Massive show. This is what we live for in the news game, isn't it? Lots of breaking news. Now, within the last few minutes, we've heard from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, as he addressed the nation for the first time this year. In a major speech, he set out his vision for 2023, promising to deliver on a 5-point plan to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce national debt, cut NHS waiting lists and stop the small boats crossing the channel. Lots of stuff there, lots of stuff he can be held to account on. Let's just remind ourselves, a little bit anyway, of what he had to say.
Since I became Prime Minister, we've made progress, stabilised the economy and people's mortgage rates, provided £26 billion of support for the cost of living, invested billions more in schools, the NHS and social care, deepened ties with allies around the world on everything from Ukraine to our collective economic security, continued our unwavering support for the armed forces in their efforts to keep us safe, and set out a concrete plan to stop the boats and tackle the unfairness of illegal migration. But of course, we need to do more.
Yes, well, there we go. Well, has the Prime Minister done enough to give you the confidence to back him and the Conservative government? Do you trust him, crucially? Some biggies there. Halving inflation. OK, we'll get stuck into that because maybe that was predicted anyway. But also, of course, stopping the small boats and reducing the NHS waiting list. Do you trust him? Did you like what he said? GB Views at gbnews.uk. I'm going to be going to you throughout the show. GB News political reporter Olivia Utley is live in central London for us. She's been watching this speech. We're going to be going to ministers and MPs throughout the course of this show as well, our in-house experts. The first one is Olivia Utley, our political reporter. Olivia, lots of things there from Rishi Sunak. I can't help but wonder whether or not he's setting himself up for failure here. Things like stopping the small boats, for example. Does that mean if one boat comes across this time next year, then he's failed?
Well, yes, it's an interesting question. I think it could be said that Rishi Sunak actually has been quite careful about what he's said there, because he's made these 5 promises, but only one, the first one, which is halve inflation, has any kind of timescale on it. Halve inflation by the end of the year, he says, something which is actually predicted to happen anyway. On the small boats thing, you'll notice the wording was introduce new laws to stop small boats. So he can introduce the laws. Will it actually stop the small boats? Is there anything actually holding him to account any further than that? He talked about earning people's trust, and to me the message was very much he wanted to talk about he will only promise what he can deliver. And actually the promises he made were relatively limited in their scope. That said, after his 5 promises, he talked about, a plan to rebuild Britain beyond just fixing things, beyond just managing the decline that we seem to be slipping our way into. And on that, he touched on some very important things which previous prime ministers have neglected, from supporting the family to cutting crime. But again, there was very little on the specifics of it, and he was pretty careful to dodge the journalist questions on the nitty-gritty elements of it at the end.
But this is something that annoyed me, and I think will have annoyed a lot of our viewers and listeners who were glued to it. And you've got the big things there. Look, we can see it at the bottom of our screen. Halve inflation, grow the economy, cut debt, slash NHS waiting list, stop the boats. OK, well, let's talk about the NHS then. What's he actually going to do?
Well, exactly. And I asked him about childcare. We know that Liz Truss had a bunch of reforms planned that would make childcare completely affordable for the average family. We know that childcare in this country is one of the most expensive in the whole of Europe. That would be a plan to show that he is supporting the family. But when I asked him about that, he just said he loved his family. He's talking about family. He's making the right noises, essentially, and wouldn't say anything about the specifics. And that was a theme, it has to be said, which carried through the speech. When asked what he would do about the NHS, he talks about the money that he's put into it. We know that the government is putting money into the NHS over and over again. But he avoided the question of structural reform. He said, talked about free at the point of use, rolled out the old mantras. But as you say, a lot of the what, very little of the how.
Yes, absolutely. Look, Olivia, thank you very much. I'm going to be thrown to you throughout the course of this show. That's GBNews' political reporter, Olivia Rutley, who's live in central London shortly. Hopefully, anyway, we're going to get a couple of ministers and MPs on that. And very shortly, I'm going to be going to our economics guru and our other political guru as well, who are sitting either side of me in the shapes of Liam Halligan and Tom Harwood. But before that, I have got some reaction from both a Labour and Conservative supporters. Peter Edwards is the former editor of Labour List. Angela Epstein is a journalist and broadcaster. Peter, I will start with you. At least Rishi Sunak has outlined some things that he wants to hear. If I was you, I would imagine I'd be quite happy, because some of them are quite ambitious, and frankly, well, he's a slave to fortune now, isn't he?
I'm not sure he's a hostage to fortune, because they were so vague. And bear in mind, Rishi Sunak said almost nothing by way of major speeches for 3 months. I was very taken by both Olivia Rutley and Liam Halligan's analysis, because they're not partisan figures like me who support a particular party, but they were both withering about the vagueness and the smallness. For example, on small boats, not stopping small boats, which Rishi Sunak has said is his priority, but introducing laws. But let's zoom out for a minute. We got Keir Starmer's speech tomorrow, in some ways a counterpart. We'll hear a lot more detail. That's also in East London. But on the biggest priorities, inflation, 13% in terms of food, we learnt today, an NHS that's in crisis that Prime Minister denies, there wasn't really anything to tackle either of those.
No, and that is a massive bone of contention that I have. It is the bane of my life as a journalist when someone just comes up and says something wishy-washy and there's no substance behind it, because actually it's a deliberate tactic. We all see through it. It means that you can't critique them on the specifics when it inevitably goes Pete Tong. Angela, I'm going to bring you in now. Angela Epstein, a journalist and broadcaster from the right, who would be fair to say, certainly further right than Peter Edwards, although that's not too hard. Is this a man just buying time now, Rishi Sunak? Are we just watching him buying time?
What else is... Hi, good afternoon to you both. What else is he supposed to do? I mean, whatever he does, he's going to be criticised for either buying time or for treading water or for all the other things that we could discuss. This was obviously a wide-ranging shopping list of promises, all of which we know need to be fulfilled. He's got less than 2 years to do it in. He's obviously not able to go into detail, and the devil will be in the detail when he can do it. But, you know, at least he has to show that he's trying. But there is so much kind of narrative centred around the fact that it's a shoo-in for Labour to win the next election, which I sincerely hope is not the case. And therefore, they can either lie back and just take it, or just say, no, these are the things. We're in a state of such critical need at the moment. He has to be able to spell out to some degree what has to be done.
OK, Angela, I'm just going to stick with you before I go back to Peter. There are some hot takes on Twitter, most notably that Rishi Sunak does have Will from the In-Betweeners vibes, and CBeebies apparently is actually trending at the minute because his delivery supposedly was like he was trying to read a really dull children's book. Where is the actual ideology? Where's the passion? Where's the personality? Do we just have a robot in a suit?
Oh, come on. And what's Keir Starmer, the next pop star, as I've said before?
But he
he's
talks
a pop
tomorrow.
star.
Are we asking the same questions about him? Let's focus on Rishi. Where's the energy? Where's the excitement? Why would you vote for him?
The thing is that we had all that with Boris, and I was a big fan of Boris, notwithstanding the serious mistakes that he made. And Rishi has emerged in the shadow of Boris, and therefore he has to sort of show himself to be statesmanlike, consistent, a stabilising force. Otherwise, it's just kind of Boris Mark II, but not a very good version of it. So he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. So I think if we judge him on the telegenics, it's a poor show. I mean, things that do make any journalist in particular cringe. Somebody asked him a question, he goes, well, thanks, Andy, or that overuse of people's names. But that's what politicians do. I want to see him deliver on the detail, obviously, and I jolly hope he can do in the 2 years he's got left. The egg timer is moving fast.
Yeah, indeed. Peter, we'll throw it back over to you now. Certainly when it comes to things like halving inflation, growing the economy, these are very vague things. But Labour's, I can't help but think, anyway, Labour's moment of maximum opportunity is slipping away from them because the predictions do say that our economy is probably going to get a bit better anyway, regardless of whether or not Rishi Sunak's there. So he will have something to cling on to, and people do care, probably more so even than the NHS or the small boats crossings, fundamentally, about the money in their pockets, Peter.
Well, the pound in your pocket is very important, as people have been saying for much of my lifetime. But you're right, inflation is forecast to come down regardless of any further government interventions next year. But I don't think it's particularly about a window of opportunity for Labour, because, of course, we know governments have to lose elections, but oppositions have to win them. And when there's a change of party and a change of government, you need a positive narrative as well. So just the fact that the economy has been in chaos and the NHS in crisis should not at all be a cause for celebration for anyone on the left. And I think, to me, I've listened very carefully to Keir Starmer, and he has laid out what he would do, just like he's changed the party internally. But I suspect we'll hear a lot more on cost of living NHS tomorrow, because ultimately, or you're probably sick of hearing this, it's become a cliche, but when there's a change of government, it's because there's a vote for change. And that's what Keir Starmer will present to hopefully seal the deal. OK, all right, both of you, I would like to just keep you on the line if that's all right, if you've got a couple of minutes to spare. I'm going to bring in my studio guests, my colleagues, my friends. Tom Harwood, I'll start with you for the political response. I've got your finger on the pulse more than kind of an open-heart surgeon. What was your hot take on this?
I think this was an extraordinary, wide-ranging speech. It was the Prime Minister's first opportunity to lay out what he actually believes. Of course, he got this role after a very tumultuous time in British politics. We really didn't see what a Rishi Sunak administration was all about. When he became Prime Minister, we were told that all of the pledges he'd made in the summer leadership contest, well, they counted for naught. We were told that it was sort of almost a blank slate when it came to policy. This was his first policy, domestic-focused speech as Prime Minister, and our first opportunity to see what he's all about beyond firefighting. And what we saw today was a wide-ranging speech, focusing not just on those big 5 pledges, perhaps those quite deliverable pledges over the next couple of years, but also talking about issues like the family, like education, skills, community, antisocial behaviour, things that might well resonate in a great number of constituencies he needs to
Hold
win.
that thought, because you said the word's deliverable. I'm keen to actually drill down on that. Liam, pick apart these numbers for me. He's obviously trying to halve inflation, reduce national debt, grow the economy. Can he?
Rather than setting himself up for failure, I think he's trying to guarantee himself success, at least in his own terms, by promising things, certainly on the economy, that are pretty almost certain to happen anyway, like inflation halving over the next 12 months. It's almost an arithmetic inevitability, same as we were saying earlier. In sum, I know we're pressed for time, this was a kind of campaign manager-written speech delivered by a professional politician rather than a speech that showed true leadership and wisdom. I thought it was just a little bit tin-eared politically. The nation's really concerned about the finances. The Christmas decorations are coming down, the bills are hitting the mat. Where was anything on housing? Families have just spent loads of time together talking about where we're going to live, how we're going to buy houses, how we're going to accommodate, are we going to have kids?
Yeah.
Probably not, because we can't afford to accommodate them. A whole speech saying what you want to do, and he didn't mention housing once.
Yeah.
That seems pretty weird, given that he's got to attract those younger voters. Frankly, Tom's age, your age. I'm older than I look.
Got a good moisturising routine.
If people your ages aren't voting Conservative, then they're not going to win this election anyway. And I didn't see anything in this for the younger generation.
No, and on that, Tom, making people do maths until they're 18. I mean, I'm sorry, but it is only the kind of policy that could have been drawn up by an utter swat.
Well, it was, of course, a smaller part of this speech than was trailed, and it was all about this innovation pledge, trying to make the United Kingdom the most innovative country in the world and delivering GDP growth that way. To be honest, it was good to hear Rishi Sunak talk about growth. It's rare that we do actually hear him prioritise that. Of course, the number one issue on his mind is inflation, and often that is coming at the cost of growth. But clearly that is one of his visions, getting that innovative capacity of the United Kingdom up.
Good stuff. Right, I'm just going to bring back in a couple of the people who were waiting on the line before. Peter Edwards, I believe, former editor of Labour List. Sorry, Peter, I'm aware that you've got to go. Can I just get you some of your pledges? What do you want to hear from Keir Starmer tomorrow in response to this? And we can see how accurate you are.
Well, the challenge for any Labour opposition that's aiming to go into government is how to pay for things. So Labour had a great idea on the windfall tax. It was rubbish, and it was adopted by the government. So I think we need pledges to fill those vacancies in the NHS. Inflation is coming down, it appears. And as Liam indicated, we need a proliferation of house building, because that's generational change as well as cost of living problems today. So paying for house building and filling some of those NHS vacancies, that's what I'd like to see.
Good stuff, Peter. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll get a quick chat with you tomorrow and we can pick apart Keir Starmer's version. Peter Edwards, their former editor of Labour List. Angela, I'll get a final word from you. Angela Epstein is a journalist and broadcaster. We've spoken a bit about his personality. Angela, a lot of people now want to see absolute substance. Which area of these do you think is going to matter most to people at the ballot box? Is it going to be inflation, national debt, NHS waiting times, small boats for you?
I think it's going to be subsequently and ultimately whether people will be better off before the next election, or better off in the long term, whether they'll be able to fulfil their mortgage obligations, whether they'll be able to get a mortgage. Because unfortunately, as much as the catastrophe of what's happening crossing the Channel, these terrible tragedies, self-interest amongst a lot of people, if you actually ask them and look them in the eye, is king, and they want to know whether they can pay their bills, and they want to know whether they'll have a home to live in. And I think ultimately that's what the government will be measured by.
Angela, thank you very much. Angela Epstein, journalist and broadcaster. Right, ladies and gentlemen, the emails are coming in thick and fast at the moment, as one would expect. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Look, I've got to be honest with you, from what I'm seeing at the minute, it's not really a mixed bag for Rishi. There's not a huge amount of love for Rishi. I wish things were different, but it's not. I can't lie to you about this at the moment. Do not rate Rishi has just popped up right in front of me, right here on the inbox from Marion. Get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Make sure you tell me and tell us exactly what you do or do not like about what he said, even if it's not just the substance, if it's to do with personality, because personality is important in politics, and there appears to be a bit of a vacuum at that at the moment. Get in touch, leave your details, get yourself on the telly. gbviews@gbnews.uk. When I come back, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll have some MPs and ministers and, of course, my esteemed studio guests.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. I tell you what, it's a great thing to see so many of you engaged in this inbox right now. GBviews at gbnews.uk, a huge amount of reaction to Rishi Sunak's 5-point plan for Britain. I'm joined in the studio to get some more reaction by our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, and our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. I am being told we've got a minister being mic'd up, people, so hold this thought. We will go live to Kevin Hollinrake very shortly, supposedly. Anyway, Tom, I'm going to bring you back in now because, look, the initial reaction to Rishi Sunak's thing was relatively negative in the sense that he seemed a bit wooden, it seemed a bit stifled, and there wasn't a lot of substance. But in the break there, you pointed out to me something he was well briefed on, and we shouldn't be too doom and gloom. Go on.
Yes, absolutely. I think he anticipated here that the number one priority from certainly journalists in the room would be all of these questions about the NHS in particular. Now, he touched on it a bit in the speech, but I think, interestingly, he was probably more verbose, more detailed even, about it in the Q&A section. He brought out the facts and figures, the 7,000 more hospital beds that have been made available, the extra diagnostics funding, the new sort of stay-at-home care model as well that we're seeing, the more money for social care. And this was in response to a number of questions from journalists, because, of course, people have been at home watching what's been going on with the backlog being cleared, with the strikes, with the real pressures that we're seeing on the NHS. Perhaps it was a point of light in this speech that he was very well briefed on the numbers and the policy with regard to fixing some of those problems, where no doubt we're seeing the NHS under enormous strain despite the extra funding that's gone in.
Yeah, absolutely. He did ask, didn't he, essentially, Liam, for a bit of time and to be judged on what he actually does. You did highlight to me a couple of things that he missed, almost like what Rishi should have said?
Yeah, we've just had some really eye-popping numbers out from the British Retail Consortium today. They're not official numbers, but the British Retail Consortium, the main industry body for food retailing, right? And they're showing that fresh food prices in December were subject to the highest inflation on record, up 15%. I'll be talking a bit more about that with you in the next hour, Patrick. Look, families have just gone through Christmas. Around the Christmas dinner table, people have been talking about rents, house prices, mortgages. People are about to remortgage in many cases. Millions of youngsters who have gone the extra mile, done the right thing, bought a home, they're now facing much, much higher interest rates. Nothing at all on that. Nothing about the 1.2 million people on council house waiting lists. Look, if you want to win some seats in the Red Wall, start talking about council housing, social housing. Nothing on that at all. Nothing on fuel prices. There seem to be big areas where he had nothing to say, where he had an opportunity to say something. You can only make a first impression once. And this was his first big speech, as Tom has rightly said a number of times, as Prime Minister at the beginning of a new year. I do think the British people, the vast majority who aren't obsessed like us with politics and news and policy, they just want to feel there's someone there who's going to be honest and a leader. And I'm not sure these pledges really worked on either count.
And yet, perhaps, the reason why he didn't go for housing is because we saw that enormous rebellion that took place just a few weeks ago within his own party. Maybe he didn't want to promise something there because he didn't think he could get it past his MPs.
Hold that thought, both of you. This is great, but we're going to go now to Kevin Hollinrake, MP, who's a Minister for Small Business, Enterprise and Markets. There we go. I believe we can go over to you, Kevin, now. Kevin, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Much appreciated. Look, these big 5 promises, a lot of people are saying, well, frankly, they sound all right, but there's no substance. What's your view?
I don't agree with that at all. I think it's refreshing to have specific targets around things, halving inflation by at the end of this year, getting the economy growing again by the end of this year, reducing debt as a percentage of the economy within 5 years. All these things are really important. The NHS, of course, making sure we can get people into A&E and back out again, all those things, and really importantly, stopping those small boats from coming across the channel. So I think these are all tangible measures, and to me they do meet the priorities of most of the people that I speak to in my constituency and in my job as Minister for Small Business.
Well, absolutely. There's no doubt about it that these are the nation's priorities, but it's a question of trust and delivery. And when it comes to the small boats, Kevin, people are sick and tired of this rhetoric. They just don't believe he'll do anything about it. Why is he different now?
Well, I can understand that. It is a very difficult problem to solve, of course, and we tend to be stopped at every turn in terms of either legislation or legal challenges in the courts. But one thing you can't take away from Rishi Sunak, he's got real credibility in whatever he's done in politics in the past. So as Chancellor, he brought the economy and saved those jobs and businesses throughout the pandemic and through the cost of living crisis. He's shown he can deliver with calm competence, and I think he'll deliver on those priorities, including those small boats.
If we are still seeing small boats coming across the channel by the time the next election rolls around, has he lost the election?
Well, I think people will definitely judge us on those things, and quite rightly too. What I really liked about the speech today, it wasn't about politics, it was about solving the problems that people are facing, and we should welcome that with specific measures, getting people through these difficult times, particularly tackling inflation, which is the thing that makes us all poorer, making sure that the economy doesn't hit rock bottom, we get through this next year in one piece, the economy comes out growing again so people can be confident they'll keep their jobs and their businesses, helping through the people through these next few months, tackling those issues in the NHS, making sure people get access to good public services, all those things. So, of course, he will accept that people are going to judge us on those things at the time of the next election.
Absolutely. Look, the NHS
now is making sure we do solve those problems.
Absolutely. Well, let's just talk about another one of those problems. Then you've mentioned it, the NHS. It's a massive behemoth of an issue, and it affects, frankly, everybody in the country. Healthcare is huge. Just explain to me again, because I thought it was a bit wishy-washy. How is he going to sort it out for us?
Well, the number one thing he's done is resourced it properly. I mean, I think we fund the NHS on a per capita basis. Now the third highest fund of the health systems in Europe. So it's got the resources it needs. Clearly, there are some other problems we've got to solve right now, not least the flu outbreak we've seen, and still the hangover from the COVID crisis and the waiting list problems we have. But he's set out measures where he wants to be seen to be judged against those in terms of no people waiting for more than 18 months by April of this year, and reducing waiting lists overall by the end of by 2024. So there's some specific measures that he's put in place, but not least putting the extra funding in it needs.
Look, absolutely. And Kevin, as you're well aware, and no doubt Rishi Sunak's advisors will be well aware, it was a very well-worded speech in a lot of sense, because it's difficult to hold him to account, frankly, because a lot of it, you'll have to wait and see whether or not it comes off. And there were some relatively vague elements to it. But one thing that wasn't vague is him as a person and his delivery. And at the moment, he's being compared to Will from The Inbetweeners. He's being compared to somebody who's pretty stiff, pretty wooden, and frankly, pretty uninspiring. Do you wish you had Boris back?
Listen, I think Rishi is the right person to lead this country now. I know him personally. I've seen him in his constituency. He's a neighbouring constituency MP to me. I know him personally. I think he's a great person. But what I think people care about is whether we deliver on the problems, deliver solutions to the problems people are facing. That's what they're going to be concerned about. You'll no doubt draw different attention to different things in terms of things that I don't think are the key problems people are facing. They care about delivery, and that's what he set out to do today, to deliver on the solutions to the problems people are facing.
Well, there you go. He's going to have to buy himself a little bit of time, and that's potentially what he's just done. Look, Kevin, thank you very much. Really appreciate you making the time for us straight off the back of that speech. Kevin Holland right there, MP, Minister for Small Business, Enterprise and Markets. Now, I'm going to go over to your headlines, but when we come back, we've got Tom, we've got Liam for all of you reaction there. Lots to pick apart when it comes to the economy, lots to pick apart, obviously, when it comes to the outright politics of it all. We heard earlier on today as well from the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. We'll be talking about that. Looking ahead to what Keir Starmer is going to be saying tomorrow. It's all getting to me. Anyway, the Prime Minister has focused on educating the nation as well with more, wait for it, maths. Yes, there's loads to pick apart here. You can't move for politics at the minute. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I will go to some of your wonderful views very, very shortly, but I believe now we're going to go to your headlines.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Good afternoon. It's 3:34. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has outlined 5 key promises setting out his government's priorities. Speaking in East London, Rishi Sunak issued a series of pledges, including promising to halve inflation to tackle the rising cost of living, growing the economy by pledging to create more opportunities across the country, reducing the national debt, which he says will secure the future of public services, cut NHS waiting lists to ensure people can get care quicker, and stopping the small boats, ensuring people are detained and swiftly removed from the country. He said his government had already made steps towards improving the country.
Since I became Prime Minister, we've made progress. Stabilised the economy and people's mortgage rates, provided £26 billion of support for the cost of living, invested billions more in schools, the NHS and social care, deepened ties with allies around the world on everything from Ukraine to our collective economic security, continued our unwavering support for the armed forces in their efforts to keep us safe, and set out a concrete plan to stop the boats and tackle the unfairness of illegal migration. But of course, we need to do more.
Well, the Prime Minister also touched on the ongoing rail strike, saying his government's door is always open for dialogue with unions. It comes on the second day of the first of 2 48-hour strikes by rail workers, with over 40,000 RMT members walking off the job over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike tomorrow, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Yeah, action-packed show this afternoon, ladies and gents. We wouldn't have it any other way. We are reacting to Rishi Sunak's big 5 pledges, his big speech. And I'm just going to do quickly a little bit of reaction, very quickly. GBviews at gbnews.uk. It's a mixed bag, mostly negative, though. I can't dress that up for you. Daniel says, I do like Rishi, a steady hand on the tiller. Seems like he genuinely cares about Britain. The vast majority of it, though, are people like Debbie. If Rishi doesn't stop the boats in the next 6 months, he will be gone. Elizabeth thinks he should have been able to deliver that speech, quite long speech, though, without actually needing to read it. OK, interesting. I think it points to a lack of personality in Elizabeth's view. Neil says that Rishi Sunak saying he has credibility on the economy is wrong because the NHS is messed up and the economy is messed up due to lockdowns. He was a part of that. So there we go. Some initial reaction there. Keep your views coming in. Rishi Sunak's big 5 pledges about how he's going to set out his vision for 2023. We are going to be analysing that and picking them apart throughout the course of the show. But a little bit of context, maybe. I want to hear an alternative view, because something that got swallowed up a little bit, but not here on GB News, was the leader of the Reform Party, Richard Tice. This was earlier today. He announced his vision for the party this year, and he actually took aim at Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. Get a load of this.
We've had 12 years of government by various incarnations of what I call the con-socialists. Taxes, the highest for 70 years. Government spending, the highest for about 50 years. Inflation, the highest for 30 years plus. And productivity collapsing everywhere, the lowest for at least 30 years.
Right, a little bit later on in the show, I'm going to be discussing and going head-to-head, actually, on kind of Reform versus Tory, because Reform apparently are definitely, cast iron guarantee, supposedly, going to be standing up candidates against every single Tory candidate. They're saying they're not going to back down this time. What does that mean for Rishi Sunak? Because it could, well, split the vote. And maybe, just maybe, it would force him into being more Conservative, although, to be fair, we haven't really seen too much evidence of that, have we? But moving on from that and drilling down into more specific parts of Rishi Sunak's pledges here, education experts are warning the Prime Minister must tackle chronic shortages of maths teachers. If they were the bane of my existence, maths teachers anyway. If his plans for all pupils in England to study some form of the subject until the age of 18 are to work. If you missed this, this was bizarrely the big grand announcement before Rishi's even bigger announcement, which is that he wants everyone to study maths, to be forced kind of at gunpoint almost to study maths until the age of 18. The Prime Minister used his first speech of 2023 to lay out a new mission to combat high rates of innumeracy in England. Here's what he said.
We need to go further. I am now making numeracy a central objective of our education system. Now, that doesn't have to mean a compulsory A-level in maths for everyone, but we will work with the sector to move towards all children studying some form of maths to 18. Just imagine what greater numeracy will unlock for people. The skills to feel confidence with your finances, to find the best mortgage deal or savings rate. The ability to do your job better and get paid more, and greater self-confidence to navigate a changing world.
I mean, he's a briefcase away from Will from the In-Betweeners there. Tom Bewick joins me now, who is the Chief Executive of the Federation of Awarding Bodies, which is the collective voice for the UK's world-class qualifications and assessment industry. Is there any evidence that making people study maths longer makes them better at maths?
Well, what's really curious, Patrick, in terms of what the Prime Minister announced today, is it's not particularly new. Back in 2017, the then Minister for School Standards, Nick Gibb, who happens to be also on his third way round, the Minister for School Standards, received a report from Professor Adrian Smith, which was precisely this policy of adopting maths up to the age of 18. And guess what? The Minister for School Standards rejected the policy at that stage. So we've lost a whole 5 years on a policy that's not particularly new.
Yeah, but it's one thing whether or not it's new, it's another thing whether or not it works. I mean, I know for a straight-up fact that if you make children study something that they absolutely don't want to do, and that, by the way, they feel that they're bad at, then there won't be any uptake in it whatsoever. You'll just end up with a load of people sat there gormlessly, not actually taking anything in. I think it's utterly pointless. And, by the way, as well, politically tin-eared. No young person in this country now is going to go out and vote Conservative because Rishi Sunak is making him do maths.
Well, look, only 52% of students at the age of 16 currently pass maths. I mean, on your point about whether it's a good idea or not, I mean, without a doubt, the Prime Minister is on to something about the levels of numeracy in our country. 1 in 5 adults are effectively, functionally innumerate. But that hasn't changed since Sir Klaus Moser's report of 1999 that found exactly the same statistic. So he's onto something in terms of if we want to build an education and scientific nation, if that's his vision, then we've got to improve numeracy skills. But there's no evidence, given that we're 13th in the PISA rankings, as it is actually for levels of numeracy at 16, that simply, as you say, saying to young people you've got to stay in the classroom and do more maths is not necessarily the answer.
Absolutely not. People will be shouting at their TV screens now, as they always do, well, haven't we got a recruitment crisis in our NHS? Have we even got enough teachers? We've got a recruitment crisis with teachers, supposedly. What about our armed forces? What about our practical trades? Instead of forcing people, children, to study stuff that they don't like and feel as though, rightly or wrongly, that they'll never use, why can't we get them all doing apprenticeships and not going and doing an extra 2 years of maths, which they might not want to do, and then going and doing a Mickey Mouse degree at a university and saddling themselves with debt? Where is the actual bold vision? There's no vision here. It's a nerd in a suit telling me to do sums.
Well, that's what's really disappointing about the announcement today. You know, the Prime Minister, first big speech of his premiership. If you go back all those decades to other Prime Ministers, we had the great education debate under James Callaghan, Lord Baker, Ken Baker, remember, he brought in the national curriculum and abolished O-levels and brought in GCSEs. Tony Blair's education. So Prime Ministers in the past have made a big play on education, and they've come up with these big ticket policies, quite revolutionary in terms of their long-term impact. What we have from Rishi Sunak today, of course, was the maths announcement. But he could have focused, as you say, Patrick, on some of the other real pressing challenges in our secondary education system. We've got 700,000 young people under the age of 24 who aren't in any form of education, training, apprenticeship or employment at all. They're just sitting on their backsides. We've also got a real problem with catch-up following the lockdowns. 100,000 kids have just disappeared off the school rolls. So he could have made a pitch for a much bigger vision about how we solve those endemic educational skills crisis in our country, which obviously would have been more pertinent on the doorstep with voters as well, than merely, as you say, saying to 16-year-olds, you've got to spend another 2 years in the classroom doing maths.
Look, Tom, thank you very much. And I must say I enjoyed you the other night as well on Neil Oliver's show, preaching a little bit of hope and light. Tom Buick there, who is the Chief Executive of the Federation of Awarding Bodies. Right, OK, I was reacting to the education side of Rishi Sunak's big announcements. But look, what do you all care about? A huge amount. Yes, OK, there's the stuff going on with the small boats. Yes, there's the economy. But frankly, as well, it's also healthcare, isn't it? And the NHS is, well, it's always in the news and not often for a very good reason. But this afternoon, Rishi Sunak has said creating hubs in the community would help cut waiting lists in the NHS. By the way, something like 7.2 million people on those waiting lists at the minute. Free up hospitals where there's bed blocking, etc., to focus on urgent care, acute care. So the Prime Minister was also asked why was he focusing on cutting waiting lists when urgent care was encountering issues. He responded by saying the government needed to do both, which, to be fair, he's absolutely spot on about. They do need to do both, don't they? Earlier, the Health Secretary blamed a surge in cases of flu, COVID and strep A for the current pressure on the NHS. Anyone else just wonder if they're hiding behind something there, maybe? Anyway, it comes as senior NHS doctors say the service is on a knife edge, with several ambulance units declaring critical incidents and reports of trust struggling to keep up with demand. Joining me now is Robert Bell. Now, Robert is a filmmaker whose mother was on a hospital trolley for 24 hours yesterday, I believe, before receiving treatment. Robert, firstly, thank you very much for coming on and talking about this. I think let's have a bit of context, if it's all right with you. Just talk to me about your mother's experience, please.
Yes, on Monday, she took ill. So I waited during the day and then called an ambulance, I guess, I called 999 in the afternoon at about 2 o'clock. I was told it would take 4 or 5 hours for an ambulance to come, but I was to wait by the phone. I did get phoned probably 2 hours later by an operative for paramedics who asked me what the symptoms were, and she said that my mother probably needed urgent attention. Paramedics did come within about 4 hours, and they're probably here about 35 to 40 minutes trying to establish the problem. They then advised that they thought she needed urgent attention and she should go to hospital, but it was my choice, so I let them take her. They waited outside in the ambulance for 15 minutes and then told me that she indeed needed to get to hospital urgently and put the blue lights on, and I followed them to the hospital. When I got there, it was very, very busy at the reception. I did get to speak to someone in reception after about 10 minutes. My mother arrived simultaneously to that, and she was taken into a room to... she was first in a corridor. A very long line of beds were in this corridor, and we were told to wait. Eventually, she was seen to by a consultant, and she was delirious. She had delirium, and they thought she needed to be treated fairly urgently. She was then taken to an A&E cubicle where she was put on a drip and given antibiotics. She was then, I understand, returned back to the corridor of this very long line of people waiting for beds. I went home. The next day I tried to call the hospital. The phone was ringing off the hook. I gave up. I got in my car and went to the hospital, and I found her in a corridor again in a line of people. I spoke to a duty nurse who told me that there was a wait for beds, but with no idea how long the wait would be. I left her because she was fast asleep on a trolley. I went home. slept rather badly last night, but called this morning and was told that she got a bed this morning and was in a ward.
Can I ask, Robert, sorry to interrupt, but can I ask, just before I move on a little bit from this, is your mother all right now? Getting better?
She's stable, but very confused. Okay. And I think she still has some sort of infection.
OK, well, obviously, incredibly sorry to hear that. I'm sure every single person watching and listening to this wishes her well. Robert, I've got to ask you, we have just had some big announcements from her. In light of what is a terrible experience, a very traumatic experience for both you and your mother, no doubt, and other loved ones as well, do you trust him to sort out the NHS?
Well, I think it's not a question of trust. I think you can... He's saying he's apportioned millions of pounds to the NHS, but the problems are systemic. It's not a question of just chucking money at the organisation. It's about sorting about the system, the management. One thing I must say is when I got into A&E and she was in a cubicle, most of the paramedics were waiting around doing the job of nurses, keeping an eye on patients. They shouldn't be keeping an eye on patients. They should be on the road.
They should be, Robert. And one of my massive concerns, and it's not just on the NHS, by the way, it's on a lot of different areas, is listening to Rishi Sunak there, who, look, I think is, a very well-meaning chap. There's nothing wrong with him on a personal level, I don't think, apart from arguably maybe a slight lack of personality, don't get me wrong. It appeared to me as though he was managing fires on a load of different fronts, as opposed to maybe having the bold vision or the cojones, if you want to put it that way, to actually get in there and rip things apart root and branch, and maybe do some of the things that you've said, which is really get to grips with the systemic problems in our NHS. I'm just not sure there's the political will or the ideological will or, frankly, the bottle in order to do that. But, Robert, I appreciate you coming on, and all the best to both you and, of course, your mother. We all wish her well. Thank you, Robert. Good luck to you. Robert Bell there, filmmaker whose mother was sadly on a hospital trolley for 24 hours yesterday. Right, a spokesperson for York and Scarborough Teaching Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, which is where Robert's mum is, said, like hospitals across the country, our emergency departments are under severe strain. And in the last couple of days, we have experienced the worst pressures on emergency services in our history, increased staff absence and high numbers of patients waiting to be discharged who no longer need to be in hospital has had an impact on our emergency departments, resulting in patients waiting much longer for beds to become available. We recognise this means that many patients will spend a long time in the emergency department before they are admitted to a ward, and we are sorry for this. Our staff are working especially hard in the most difficult of circumstances. Right of reply, done. Right, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, more on Rishi Sunak's 5-point plan for 2023 as he pledged to tackle inflation and the small boats crisis. We're going to delve down into that. We'll also tackle head-on reports this afternoon. We could be on the verge of a return to some form of COVID restrictions. I can't believe I'm saying this either, but yes, some form of COVID restrictions could be just around the corner. Good time to announce it, though, isn't it? Given the fact that we're all buried in Rishi Sunak's big announcement. Before that, though, it's your weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. The very mild weather we've got at the moment stays with us overnight, but then it turns cloudier tomorrow with rain for some. At the moment, low pressure is moving away from the UK, but another low is brewing out of the Atlantic in between a strong westerly to southwesterly airflow and a lot of cloud across the UK. The cloud thickest in the west, but chance of some breaks in the east and the far north. Showers tend to ease overnight, although a few will remain for northern England, southern and western and northern Scotland. And a few outbreaks of rain push into the southwest as well as parts of Wales and Northern Ireland by the end of the night. With cloudier skies in the west, it's a mild start to the day on Thursday, a bit colder in the east and more especially for northern Scotland, where there will be a touch of frost first thing. Beautiful sunny skies to start, though, for parts of Aberdeenshire, Caithness, Sutherland. Eastern England seeing a bright start as well. It doesn't last. Cloud rolls in from the west. Some outbreaks of rain associated with this cloud, but not much. I think some parts of the south will stay dry through the day. And it'll be very mild once again, 12 to 14 Celsius in the south, 6 to 11 further north. And then it turns wetter and windier for western Scotland and Northern Ireland as we end the afternoon on Thursday. Now, this area of rain sweeps into the rest of the UK overnight, so most places getting wet through the hours of darkness. Strong winds associated with it as well, but even stronger winds return to Scotland behind the front. Gales for western Scotland, 60, perhaps 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts by dawn on Friday. A lot of showers here. Drier elsewhere with some clear spells. A bit colder as we start off Friday across England, Wales, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland. Some brightness first thing Friday. Further showers, I think, will continue across northern and western Scotland through the day, and 1 or 2 showers for western parts of the rest of the UK. But otherwise, Friday is a gap between weather systems because there's more rain to come at the weekend, mostly in the form of heavy showers.
Sundays on GB News from 9:30, it's Camilla Tominey.
For a politics show with personality.
Then at 11, Michael Portillo.
For topical discussion, debate, some ethical dilemmas, and sometimes even a sense of the ridiculous.
And at 1 p.m, me, Alistair Stewart. Every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Well, it's 4 o'clock. You're with Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up this hour, a 5-point plan to set out his vision for Britain. Rishi Sunak is asking you to judge his premiership in number 10 on these pledges.
So, 5 promises. We will halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the boats. Those are the people's priorities. They are your government's priorities.
Right, well, there we go. At least fair play to him. He set it out, but I want to hear from you. Are his promises enough to get your vote? Do you trust him? It's a question of trust, isn't it, really, I think? I'll be sharing those thoughts, your thoughts, very, very shortly. What would be at the very top of your priority list? GB Views at gbnews.uk. You know the drill by now, people. Now, the cost of living crisis is also at the very heart of some of the big issues facing families across the UK. Today, new figures show the price of food has jumped to record levels. Our economics and business editor Liam Halligan is going to be in on this, and could we be on the verge of a return of some coronavirus restrictions? I know, I can't believe I'm saying this either, but I am. Reports this afternoon are that ministers are considering issuing fresh guidance on mask wearing, working from home and even social distancing, as health bosses claim the NHS is at risk of collapse. Isn't it time the NHS started protecting us, not the other way round? Let me know your thoughts. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Big on Rishi. What do you make of his plans? And also, actually, are you sick and tired of even the chatter of new coronavirus laws? GBViews at gbnews.uk. But now it's your headlines.
Thank you, Patrick. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has outlined 5 key promises setting out his government's priorities. Speaking in East London, Rishi Sunak issued a series of pledges, including promising to halve inflation to tackle the rising cost of living, growing the economy by pledging to create more opportunities across the country, reducing the national debt, which he says will secure the future of public services, cut NHS waiting lists to ensure people can get care quicker, and stopping the small boats, ensuring people are detained and swiftly removed from the country. He said his government had already made steps forwards improving the country.
Since I became Prime Minister, we've made progress, stabilised the economy and people's mortgage rates, provided £26 billion of support for the cost of living, invested billions more in schools, the NHS and social care, deepened ties with allies around the world on everything from Ukraine to our collective economic security, continued our unwavering support for the armed forces in their efforts to keep us safe, and set out a concrete plan to stop the boats and tackle the unfairness of illegal migration. But of course, we need to do more.
The Royal College of Nursing has responded to the PM's comments about the pressures facing the NHS, saying they're detached from reality. The RCN say the pressures being faced are far more ordinary than just winter pressures. It comes after the Health Secretary blamed a surge of flu cases, COVID and Strep A concerns for pressures the NHS faced over Christmas. Well, the Prime Minister also touched on the ongoing rail strike, saying his government's door is always open for dialogue with unions. It comes on the second day of the first of 2 48-hour strikes by rail workers, with over 40,000 RMT members walking off the job over paid jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike tomorrow, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. Well, RMT boss Mick Lynch told GB News the union wants a sensible agreement that everyone can support.
The message is that we do apologise for the inconvenience and we are working towards getting a solution. But there are a lot of people that are frustrated. We've got the health workers, education workers, firefighters are all getting the same treatment from the government, that they seem to want to extend the agony and not give people a square deal. And all we want is a square deal for our members, and then we can create a settlement.
Concerns have been raised over a lack of basic cold and flu medications at Britain's pharmacies. The Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies is warning its members are running out of products such as throat lozenges and cough mixtures. They say the problems arise from a lack of planning by officials at the Department of Health. Supermarket Sainsbury's has announced it's to increase wages for nearly 127,000 workers from next month. Workers of both Sainsbury's and Argos will see increases from £10.25 to £11 outside of London. Staff wages inside the capital will increase to nearly £12. The group said the measures were to help retain existing and attract new employees in a tight labour market. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. The British Retail Consortium says it was a challenging Christmas for many households right across the UK. And Edinburgh Zoo says the UK's only giant pandas will both be going back to China this year. It's nearing the end of an agreement with Chinese officials for Shan Shan, a female, and Yang Huan, a male, who've been at the zoo for 12 years. They're having special farewell events until their exact leave date is confirmed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
Right, let's crack on, shall we? Within the last hour, Rishi Sunak has claimed the vision he's set out this afternoon may not be achieved in this Parliament, but he will work night and day to change the UK. During his first keynote speech, it was very much a keynote speech, wasn't it, of the year, the Prime Minister set out 5 key pledges he asked voters to judge him on. Let's take a deeper look at those pledges, shall we? So, number 1 is to halve inflation this year. A very clear goal to judge him by. So, halving inflation by this year as a means to ease the cost of living crisis. Well, hey, look, we could all get behind that, can't we? He said he wants people to regain their financial stability. Again, cracking stuff. Good stuff, Rishi. Next was his promise to grow Britain's economy by creating better paid jobs, opening up opportunities for employment across the country. That's a levelling up pledge, that isn't it? Perhaps a nod to Boris Johnson's, oh, there you go, levelling up agenda. It's almost like I read these scripts, isn't it? Third, another pledge on the economy. Make sure national debt is falling in order to, in his words, secure the future of public services. He'll be hoping that he goes some way to fixing the crisis in the NHS. And, speaking of the NHS, Rishi Sunak's 4th pledge, reduce the time that people spend on waiting lists and ensure that they receive the care that they need more quickly. A sure bet for a key election issue next year. That'll be one to judge him on. And finally, a key issue for GB News viewers and listeners, a massive issue, frankly, for the nation and indeed the taxpayer, of course, as well. Reduce the number of those small boats crossing the English Channel illegally. The Prime Minister said he would pass new laws to ensure that those doing that would be detained and swiftly removed. As I'm sure you can imagine, given that he's picked 5 of really the biggest issues facing the UK, I don't think he's got it wrong in terms of the main issues that are affecting most people. You've got money in your pocket, you've got illegal immigration, you've got the health service, there was a bit on education as well. OK, fine, so he's hit the key ones there, but because they're so big, there's loads to pick apart for every single issue, isn't there? And how achievable, really, are his promises going to be, and how much are you going to be able to make them stick to him as well? So, for example, the small boat stuff, right? So does this really mean that if absolutely no small boats come across by the time the next election comes by, then that's a win for Rishi Sunak? Does one small boat mean that he's failed in his pledge there? Anyway, GB News' political reporter Olivia Rutley is live in central London after watching Rishi Sunak's speech. Thank you very much, Olivia. Great to have you back on, of course. Yes, now the dust has settled slightly, your hot take on Rishi Sunak's 5 promises. Some people saying it's a bit wishy-washy.
Well, I think we can certainly agree that he managed to diagnose the problems facing the country pretty accurately. He talked about those 5 problems. Then he moved on after that to his vision for the country, which seems to be based on stronger families, something which we haven't heard a Conservative Prime Minister mention in quite a long time. That was refreshing to hear. Talk about tackling crime, talk about tackling the drug epidemic in this country. So he was keen to effectively diagnose what's gone wrong in Britain. His solutions, they seemed quite specific when he laid out those 5 different goals to fix Britain. It sounded as though he was going to be judged on the results. When you look a little bit, scratch the surface, look a little bit deeper into that, it might be that Rishi Sunak was being a bit clever about how much he promised. You'll notice that of the 5 promises, only the first one actually had a timescale on it. That was halve inflation by the end of the year. Well, we know that inflation is set to about halve by the end of the year anyway, so whether that's a goal or a prediction, it's harder to say. As for the legislation about small boats, which is obviously a very pressing issue and one that's deeply concerning to our viewers, he said that he would stop the small boats, and then he said that he would introduce legislation to stop the small boats. Well, those are 2 slightly different things. What will he be judged on? Does he want to be judged on introducing that legislation, or does he want to be judged on stopping the small boats? And can he really get a grip on it? Well, I spoke just outside here a few moments ago to Laura Trott, who's a junior minister in Rishi Sunak's government, and here's what she had to say about it.
What's very interesting about this, if you look at the number of Albanian immigrants who are sent back to Albania in other countries, for example, France, it's in the 80-90%, whereas in the UK, it's 40 to 45, I think. You know, Albanians make up a large number of the illegal immigration which is coming into this country. It's something that absolutely needs to be dealt with, and I think that's why the Albanian deal will make a difference. But he wants to go further than that. You know, he set out a plan in the House of Commons a few weeks ago, and then he was talking about further legislation today. So this is not something that can be solved easily or quickly, but I do think the Albanian deal will make a difference.
Right, well, Olivia, of these pledges that he's laid out, or ideas that he's laid out, well, supposedly inflation might have been about to fix itself, depending on what you read at the minute. When it comes to things like NHS waiting times, we have just had the big winter surge, haven't we? So that might just start to look better anyway. This, I think, the cracking interview that you had there with Laura Trott about the small boats crisis is, I think, the point of maximum distrust for the British public at the moment. They've heard it all before, they've heard strong rhetoric before, and absolutely nothing has happened. Why is this time different?
Well, Rishi Sunak has set out a 5-point plan to stop the boats. A few of them, which include having more British police officers in French stations to watch what's going on, has been tried before and hasn't been particularly effective. The biggest point of his 5-point plan that was announced a few weeks ago was this deal with the Albanians, which will essentially mean that any Albanian who comes to this country, Albania is of course deemed a safe country, will be immediately sent back. And Conservative MPs are very keen to shout about that. We heard Laura Trott doing that just then. They want to show that, you know, this is a new plan. And yes, it is a new plan. But the problem is that it isn't just Albanians who want to come to this country.
No.
And actually, as the Times are reporting today, ministers are even conceding that this won't really scratch the surface of the problem, because even if we do stop the Albanian immigrants coming over, there's an infinite number of immigrants coming over to the UK hoping to claim asylum. And without a proper plan in place, and the Rwanda plan hasn't yet worked properly, it's very hard to see how Rishi Sunak can get a grip of this.
No, it is indeed. And yes, I read that article with interest, which is, OK, if you plug the Albanian gap, well, then you end up with a load of Syrian, Eritreans, Afghans, etc. But anyway, there we go. Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Utley there, just reporting to us and reacting just after Rishi Sunak's big 5 points. But he loves a 5-pointer, doesn't he? You can tell this bloke used to work in the city. PowerPoint presentations coming out of his ears, can't he? He's got 5 points for absolutely everything. Let's get some reaction from you as to what Rishi Sunak's had to say. Joining me now are two GB News viewers. We've got Miranda Richardson in Northamptonshire and Susan Harris in Carmarthenshire. Both of you, thank you very much. Great to have you both on the show. Susan Harris, I will start with you, if that's all right. Your overall take on Rishi Sunak's speech. Has it made you like him more or less, or what's going on for you?
I've never heard anybody make a speech with so many platitudes, sound bites, and just paying lip service. But hey, you know, it's going to cure inflation and grow the economy with quantum and fintech, and all the problems with the NHS, they're going to be cured because he's going to be using part oximeters. And I'm sure we'll all be sleeping soundly in our beds tonight knowing all that. It's just blinding people with science. And to me, it's just shown how inexperienced he is. He shouldn't be PM anyway, because we haven't voted him in. He's got no connection with real life at all. But the thing is, they never, ever take responsibility. They keep saying that the problem with the NHS is because they can't free beds up. The reason they can't free beds up is you can go right back to Margaret Thatcher, because she closed all the convalescent hospitals down.
All right.
That's why they've got the problem with that.
All right, Susan, I will pause you there, if that's all right, and bring in Miranda Richardson in Northamptonshire. Miranda, your overall take on what Rishi Sunak said. Susan's given a withering account of Rishi's performance.
Well, do you know, it's a little bit like an audition for Miss World. All we were missing was he was going to, you know, solve world peace. Yeah, really, I think you said earlier, really wishy-washy. Oh, we're going to make inflation better and we're going to create more jobs and we're going to save the NHS again. Just really expected a bit more. Really expected something that was groundbreaking, but it just wasn't.
Well, look, both of you, you know, I was a bit cynical about it. I didn't like it, but you two pop it up. It's like listening to the BBC, this. What's going on? Come on. Is there nothing good, Miranda? Is there nothing good about it for you?
No, if I'm honest, I'm not seeing anything in there. You know, he's completely out of touch with the NHS. He really is. And that's quite sad, because we have a great institution that's just getting worse and worse by the minute. You know, how can you solve, you know, waiting times for people when they can't see the people that they've got now? You can't.
Well, he's
make
asking
it
for
better
time,
or
isn't he,
reduce
on
it
that?
if you can't see the people you've got.
I get that. He's asking for time on that, isn't he? From what I can gather, I mean, there was a heck of a lot of stuff to try to soak in and absorb like a sponge there. As I understand it, anyway, when it came to the NHS, he wants to do things like local hubs and give people a bit more flexibility, whether or not it's things like pharmacists being able to give out prescriptions, etc., to maybe try to take the burden off. But I think, Miranda, it for me anyway, fundamentally lacked a clear, bold, ballsy vision, I'll say it. It needs to get rid of this root and branch stuff. And Susan, can I ask you, look, we've got, some policy here. Keir Starmer's going to be speaking tomorrow. We had Reform UK, Richard Tice, earlier on lay out his vision. There was a fair bit of substance in that. We'll be talking about that later on. But Susan, can I talk to you about Rishi Sunak's personality? Because at the minute, I'm looking at Keir Starmer, a bit of a snooze fest. Rishi Sunak, I mean... Look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's like looking at Will from The Inbetweeners, isn't it? Or am I being mean, Susan?
No, you're not being mean. I can't take him serious as a Prime Minister. And all this business, I love my country, I love you all, and I'm going to take you all to the sunny uplands. But I'd like to take you back to the year 2008, because Rishi Sunak was one of the hedge fund managers that lit the blue touch paper that started the banking crisis that nearly decimated this country, wiped out private pensions overnight. They knew what was going to happen. They still did it, and they made themselves a cool £100 million. So all this from Rishi Sunak, I take no notice of it because I don't believe him, I don't trust him. He should not be Prime Minister. And I hope that the next general election is voted out. But the tragedy is...
Well, but then who do you have? But then this is the thing. Now, this is what I'm getting in... Now, this is what I'm getting in my inbox a lot, which is... Look, I can only say what I've got in front of me now, which is... And I will say this. When Boris Johnson was in charge, even when Boris Johnson was right in the thick of scandal after scandal after scandal, whatever... The amount of love I had in this inbox for Boris Johnson was unbelievable, right? It was. And people would have voted for him no matter what he'd done. He could have kicked a puppy to death on the steps outside Downing Street, and thousands of people in this inbox would have still gone out and voted for him the next day. Rishi Sunak, there's no love at all, and that word trust comes up all the time. Why do you think that is, Miranda? Why do you think people look at Rishi Sunak and apparently, according to the inbox here, just don't trust him?
No, and I think this is the thing. You can't trust a man who doesn't fundamentally understand the issues that his country are up against, because he's in a different league, and that's not dissing him as a human, if you like, because you can't help that. But you cannot understand or get to the bottom of things when that is never ever going to touch your life.
But is this a bit unfair? No, see, Miranda, I get what you're saying, right? Absolutely, and there's no doubt about it. He is a bit out of touch, all right. But at the same time, fair play to the guy. He's cracked on in life. He had a relatively comfortable start. Millions of people have the same start in life as Rishi Sunak and go on and splash it all up the wall. They don't go and make the amount of money that he's made, all right. His wife was incredibly wealthy as well, so that does help. But we can't have it all. Apparently, we want someone who's a bit of a character at the same time as being successful, at the same time as living in the real world, at the same time as being serious. It's a difficult combination to get right. Both of you, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this, and good luck to you both as well. I'll speak to you very soon. Miranda Richardson there in Northamptonshire, Susan Harris in Carmarthenshire. The views of the British public, get them coming in. GBviews at gbnews.uk. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, tackling inflation. That's high on the Prime Minister's priority list, and so it should be as well, because today new figures show the price of food has jumped to record levels. Let me know the most ridiculous food prices that you've seen. I know in the run-up to Christmas we had £150 turkeys going at Morrison's, for example, but has that worn off for you a bit now? Have you still got security tags on your butter? I want to know. It's heaping more pressure on the government, though, to take action on business and economics, and it's Liam Halligan. We'll have the very latest on all of that before, though, we've got a very short break.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way.
Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, all right, well, welcome back, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News. We've got a load coming your way, including food prices, etc., inflation. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has condemned the Conservative government for record-high food prices, saying all 12 years of Tory government have left us with is higher prices, lower wages and growth on the floor. This follows this morning's figures from the British Retail Consortium, revealing a jump to 13.3% in December from 12.4% the previous month, with fresh food prices seeing the biggest rise. Joining me now is, apparently anyway, MP and Liberal Democrat spokesperson for Women and Equality's the Cabinet Office in Scotland, Christine Jardine. I thought I was going to talk to Liam Halligan, but here you go, Christine. I will not say no to you. There we are. I know. Confused. We're often confused. You've never been seen in the same room at the same time, clearly. I don't know who that's more offensive towards. Anyway, right, Christine, good to have you on the show, if not rather unexpectedly. What do you make of Rishi Sunak's 5 proposals?
Well, it's good to hear that he actually recognises that there are areas that need to be fixed, but it's a bit like listening to a list of the things that he's got wrong over the past few years as Chancellor and Prime Minister, and then, miraculously he's going to fix them, but no targets and no details of how he's going to fix it. So, if he was in business, I would say to him, the key to success is often to under-promise and over-deliver, whereas this government just keep over-promising and under-delivering. It's just not working.
OK, well, look, I've got to ask, what's the Lib Dems' plan to sort out the small boats crisis?
To sort out the?
Small boats crisis.
The small boats crisis is only one crisis that we've got. And the problem that we have there is that we don't have an immigration system that works. It's not fit for purpose. We don't have safe legal routes. And, we have to address the problem at its source and, help people who are fleeing, in many cases, war, poverty. They don't do this very often, because of choice. They are forced to do it. But that's just one of the things Rishi Sunak talked about today. He talked about the problems with the health service. He talked about the problems with the economy. But, what has he been doing? What have they been doing for the past 6 years? If they hadn't spent so much time focusing on the internal Conservative chaos over the summer, we might not have the mess that we've got now. It's a lot of talk.
All right, I get what you're saying. Look, I get what you're saying, all right? But he's not been in the job that long, and as they say in middle management, we are where we are, right? So when it comes to the NHS, what's the Lib Dems' plan to sort it? And you've heard at least a little bit from Rishi. How are you going to fix it? What's better about you lot?
Well, we actually issued a 5-point plan. I'm sorry that you haven't seen it. We recognise that the NHS is in serious trouble, and what we need is a campaign to recruit and retain staff. We are so short of staff in the NHS that the staff we have they're buckling under the pressure. We need fully funded programmes to get people who are medically well back home and stop them being, stuck in hospital and, causing a backlog. That's not happening. We need investment in more hospital beds. We need to expand mental health support services. And, ambulance waiting times are appalling. And what Daisy Cooper's bill, if the government would accept it, would do is give us a localised report on just how long people are having to wait so that we can act to improve things. So there's a 5-point plan. Now, this government has been in government for 6 years, during which the situation has got worse. These are the people in the NHS who got us through the worst crisis that we have known and hopefully will know in our lifetimes. And now, instead of dealing with that, the Conservatives focused on their internal chaos over the summer and did nothing about preventing what we could all see was going to be a problem this winter. Well, it's entirely their fault. And for Rishi Sunak to stand up now and say, I'm going to fix it. Well, he was Chancellor. He's Prime Minister.
Well, on that,
he created problems.
Just on that, Christy, is it not slightly disingenuous of you to say that the Conservatives were focusing on the internal chaos? Because you were trying to stoke as much internal chaos as possible because you wanted Boris Johnson out, you wanted general elections, you wanted you lot to have another shot at getting a result. And just in terms of what you said there, just broadly speaking, look, Rishi Sunak... Well, yeah, come on. Rishi Sunak has laid out...
best for the country.
OK,
and we've had years of chaos under the Tories. We wanted what was best for the country.
OK, on that note, you have very eloquently, I may say, and straight off the bat outlined the Lib Dems' 5-point plan when it comes to the NHS. Absolutely fair play to you. We've just heard Rishi Sunak there. He's delivered his 5 points on various different things. We've got Keir Starmer tomorrow. I mean, if he's following the theme, there'll be 5 points from him as well. But we did have the leader of the Reform Party UK earlier on, Richard Tice, and he's saying, actually, well, it appears anyway, that at least in quite a lot of the polls, they're ahead of you, the Liberal Democrats. How do you make of that? How do you square that then, particularly? Because it would appear, though, that despite you've got your lovely 5-point plan for the NHS, people are turning more Conservative.
No. The polls are not what matters at the moment. What matters at the moment is solving the problems that we have in this country. And you said, quite interestingly, you pointed out yourself, Rishi Sunak's giving us his 5 points. We've given you a 5-point plan. Rishi Sunak's not giving us a plan. He's not giving us, any times when targets are going to be met. It's all a bit vacuous and a bit kind of, we'll do these things, but we can't tell you when and how. That's not good enough. What is important now is not the opinion polls. It's not how people vote at the next general election. It's how we deal with this crisis, these crises that we've got at the moment. Most of them, can be laid fairly and squarely at the door of the Conservatives. No one could predict a pandemic, but they didn't deal with it particularly well. They dealt with it quite badly, in fact. The war in Ukraine, that, we should be doing more to support there and to do something about the energy crisis. These are all things which the Conservative government has failed to address. And Rishi Sunak can't pass it off as somebody else's mistakes because he was Chancellor. Now he's Prime Minister. And the mistakes he's having to fix are mistakes that his government created.
All right, well, you finished on the economy. When we come back off the news, we're going to be talking more about the economy. Christine, thank you very much. Always appreciate having you on the show. Christine Jardine there, who is Liberal Democrat spokesperson for Women and Equalities and the Cabinet Office and Scotland as well. Broad range of stuff there. Right, I promise you I will go to Liam Halligan at some point in a second. You are with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, Rishi Sunak has said he will work night and day to change the UK as he delivered his first keynote speech of the year. Has addressed the crisis as well. Within the NHS, he claimed that he'd reduce waiting lists. We'll discuss that next. Crucially, as well, the economy with our very own economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. But now it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has outlined 5 key promises setting out his government's priorities. Speaking in East London, Rishi Sunak issued a series of pledges, including promising to halve inflation to tackle the rising cost of living, growing the economy by pledging to create more opportunities across the country, reducing the national debt, which he says will secure the future of public services, cut NHS waiting lists to ensure people can get care quicker, and stopping the small boats, ensuring people are detained and swiftly removed from the country. He said his government had already made steps towards improving the country.
Since I became Prime Minister, We've made progress, stabilised the economy and people's mortgage rates, provided £26 billion of support for the cost of living, invested billions more in schools, the NHS and social care, deepened ties with allies around the world on everything from Ukraine to our collective economic security, continued our unwavering support for the armed forces in their efforts to keep us safe, and set out a concrete plan to stop the boats and tackle the unfairness of illegal migration. But of course, we need to do more.
The Royal College of Nursing has responded to the PM's comments about the pressures facing the NHS, saying they're detached from reality. The RCN say the pressures being faced are far from ordinary winter pressures. It comes after the Health Secretary blamed a surge of flu cases, COVID and Strep A concerns for pressures the NHS faced over Christmas. And the Prime Minister also touched on the ongoing rail strike, saying his government's door is always open for dialogue with unions. It comes on the second day of the first of two 48-hour strikes by rail workers, with over 40,000 RMT members walking off the job over paid jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike tomorrow, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. Author Faye Weldon, who's best known for her novel The Life and Love of a She-Devil, has died at the age of 91. She published more than 30 novels in her career, as well as short stories and plays written for television, radio and the stage. She was also one of the writers on the popular 1970s drama series Upstairs and Downstairs. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. Now, earlier I promised you that I would run through some food prices, which jumped to 13.3%, apparently, in December, according to new figures from the British Retail Consortium. Joining me now to break it all down for you is our economics and business editor. It's Liam Halligan with On the Money. Take it away.
And I'm not Christine Jardine.
No, no.
No, it's close.
That was a shock.
So, GB News viewers and listeners know every month we have the official inflation numbers from the Office for National Statistics. We haven't got those yet. What we have got are inflation numbers from the British Retail Consortium, which are kind of preempt the official numbers. They're not, the official record, but they're pretty good because obviously the British Retail Consortium are a very big organisation. And I can show you the numbers here. What these new BRC numbers show on the graphic is that in November, Patrick, inflation for fresh food was 14.3%. That means in November, a basket of fresh food, a particular basket, would have been 14.3 times more expensive than November 2021, right? If you fast forward to December, we can see that in December, that number went up to 15%.
Wow.
That's the highest annual inflation for fresh food that the British Retail Consortium has ever recorded. That's higher than the general number, what we call the Consumer Price Index. Here it is an official number. In November, the Consumer Price Index, the official inflation number across all goods and services, was 10.7%. We won't get the December CPI number. That comes out on the 18th of January. But just from those numbers, you can see that fresh food is going up much more than regular goods and services. And that's why I often say on GB News, been saying for a long time, as this cost of living squeeze bites, we all focus on the headline inflation number, the CPI number. But for lower income families, those who spend disproportionately on food, on fuel, on rent, on mortgage costs, right? If they're lucky enough to own their own home, all these basics, inflation for those has been much higher than the official 10, 11% inflation number. So when ministers talk about inflation of 10 or 11%, for a lot of people on lower and even middle incomes, that sounds like a sick joke. It sounds a massive underestimate of what's happened to their cost of living over the last year.
Is this going to get better anytime soon?
I mean, Rishi Sunak, you and I and Tom Harwood, we watched Rishi Sunak's speech, and I actually think rather than setting himself up for failure with these brave pledges, he's guaranteeing success in his own terms. It's almost certain that inflation's going to halve over the next 12 months. It's almost an arithmetic inevitability unless we have another massive fuel price shock because of some massive geopolitical event, like maybe the OPEC oil exporters cartel getting really nasty or something like that. But then you can just say, oh, who could possibly have foreseen that? Similarly, I think where he says he wants waiting lists to fall, given that waiting lists are at an all-time high, coming off the back of a COVID lockdown where we almost stopped many parts of elective surgery, then of course, as the backlog falls, waiting lists are going to come down. So I do think inflation will get better. And over the holidays in my newspaper columns, I wrote that I actually think the peak of interest rates, they're currently 3.5%, is going to be about 4.5%, which is much lower than where the sort of money markets, where people are placing their bets in terms of the wholesale financial markets. So I actually think there is light at the end of the tunnel in terms of inflation coming down and interest rates peaking.
Good stuff, Liam. Thank you very much. Liam Halligan there, our Economics and Business Editor. I'll be speaking to you again a little bit later on. It's a good little dovetail that. I mentioned elective surgeries, etc., because the Health Secretary has blamed high numbers of flu cases, COVID-19, strep A fears as well, for the current pressure on the NHS. Well, the comments come as senior doctors say the NHS is on a knife edge, with the government reportedly considering a return, and this is the juicy bit, to some COVID-style measures, such as wearing masks in public places, working from home as well, and social distancing. That's in order to solve this perceived crisis. Lucy Johnson, the Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Daily Express, is with me now. Lucy, any more COVID restrictions is going to go down like a cup of cold sick with the electorate, isn't it?
Well, it depends who you talk to. Some people are for it and some people very against it. We do have a polarised population and indeed a polarised academic community. But we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years an epic failure of masks to do anything to slow the spread of respiratory viruses on any level. Infection rates did not go up and down according to mask mandates in any area of the world. So they don't work. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is a return to measures that do increase fear. And when you increase fear, people stay away from each other, people do social distancing, and that does a disservice to particularly younger people, but all people, because we have a bigger pool of population that's then susceptible to viruses in the future. And that's what we're seeing now. We've had
Lucy,
this huge spike in...
I can't help but feel as though it's gone a bit topsy-turvy when it comes to our NHS. Instead of waking up in the morning and thinking, well, I'll just go about my daily life, and then if something catastrophic happens, the NHS will be there for me. Now, increasingly, we're being asked to live our lives around protecting the NHS. Isn't it supposed to be there to protect us?
Well, it's predictable. What happens every winter, particularly in December, is totally predictable. Every year you get critical black alerts in hospitals. It's particularly bad this year because of all the pressures that we've talked about so much on the programme. But every single year we get these extra pressures. We get people lying in corridors, and we don't seem to be able to plan for it. We seem to be doing more knee-jerk reactions. And if it comes to the state of the nation, where we're talking about masking infected adults to prevent the hospitals being overwhelmed, then what state are we in? We do need extra beds. We've got something like 3.5 million extra people that have, in the population over the last 10 years. A good proportion of those, I think about 2 million, are older, over 65. And with that, we've had a decrease in beds.
Yeah.
So we need to increase that, whether we have them in hospitals, which are expensive, or whether we need to return to sort of convalescent beds in the community where you can have a nurse to look after people and just help people recover. Because that's a lot of the problem, as well as the delayed discharges.
We had Nightingale hospitals for a period of time, but they seem to have disappeared. I mean, what a cracking use of taxpayers' money they were, the giant overflow car parking white elephants of our National Health Service. But, Lucy, just quickly and finally from you, you mentioned there the ageing population. Yeah, fine, OK. Do you not find it a bit strange that people don't seem to mention our rapidly growing population and the impact that appears to be having on our health service as well?
It's just another example of this inability to look down the track, look long-term and plan. So instead, what we see is that every time there's an emergency, governments sort of talk amongst each other, talk to colleges, look for quick fixes and sort of make these hollow promises without actually evaluating it and without actually looking deeply into the problems to try and look downstream and see how we can prevent the problems happening in the first place. Yeah, it is very odd.
OK, all right, Lucy, thank you very much. Lucy Johnson there, the Health and Social Affairs Editor of the Daily Express. Now I've got Dr Veena Babu, a GP, who joins me. Thank you very much, Dr Veena. Great to have you on the show. The NHS, we're hearing, is constantly under pressure. It's on a knife edge, supposedly, isn't it? Would you, as someone who works in the NHS, recommend us social distancing, increasing our working from home, for example, in order to protect people like you?
Thank you for having me again, and I have to agree with Ms Johnson. We need to anticipate rather than just react. We could anticipate the pressures that are going to come with winter, with strep A cases rising, with influenza cases and complications, aging populations. This is not new news. This is things that we should have anticipated for and prepared for. Being a doctor who works in A&E, seeing the waiting hours go from 4 to 7, where you see elderly patients waiting in the corridors, on chairs, sometimes no chairs, literally on the trolleys that they get off the ambulances from. It's heartbreaking to see. And you see staff members bending over backwards to make ends meet. And I mean this because it's not like you're leaving anyone to die, but you're watching them not at the epitome of health.
I get that, but should we now then be doing things, in your view, like putting masks on, social distancing, working from home, and just doing like daily COVID tests to make sure we're not passing this thing on? Would that make your life easier? Would it take the burden off the NHS?
Personally, no, because I think I agree again with what Ms Johnson said. I think it would just emphasise the culture of fear. I don't think it's going to do much in terms of infectivity or in terms of protecting the vulnerable, because I think everyone is smart and sensible enough now to take measures if someone is unwell to stay away from them. But then isolating people further would not be the answer, because by the time they deteriorate, they might get too unwell to then get help.
OK. What do you make of Rishi Sunak, some of his little plans for the NHS? He wants to obviously take the burden off waiting times, maybe have more community hubs, for example, to stop people presenting themselves at A&E. Did you like anything that he had to say at all?
Yeah, I think community hubs are a great idea, and a lot of primary care doctors are involved in a lot of them. But again, with these, there are so many multi-level challenges. It's not just winter pressures, it's staff shortages, staff leaving the NHS, rota gaps, long waiting hours. There are so many different levels. We can just be hopeful. And I do genuinely want to believe these changes will happen. So I just want to be hopeful.
OK, all right. Now, there was an article that I read with actually quite a lot of interest. It was in the Times earlier on today that was about us being, quotes unquote, gaslit by NHS managers. So in the sense that you've got this layer of people who are beneath, so you've got your nurses, your GPs, your doctors, your paramedics, all of those people, and they work very, very hard and they maybe could do with a bit more money. And then you've got, your politicians at the other end. But in the middle there are the people who don't seem to be taking any blame whatsoever, which are people who are normally on quite good money, who are the managers of the NHS, who are in charge of actually distributing the NHS budget. And at the minute, it's a bit of a bottomless pit. Do you think that actually the managers in the NHS need to cop it a little bit more? It can't just be politicians.
Absolutely, I agree. I do agree. I think with cost of living going up, everybody's struggling. And I know recently nurses were in the news everywhere because of them going to strike. And I've spoken about this before, having worked closely with them on long hours. I still, I'm still on their side with that. So I think if there is a case where managers can stick up for the other layers of people working, it's not even about equality of pay. It's about some level of fair pay for the amount and pressures and responsibility of work that these people do.
OK, look, thank you very, very much. Look, great to have you on the show. Really good insight. That is Dr. Veena Babu there, who is a GP. A range of stuff there. No, so not entirely critical of what Rishi Sunak has said, community hubs, but saying something that, with respect, but rightly so, I think we all knew, which is that the NHS is such a multi-layered onion of misery at the moment that it does need more things to sort it out other than these community hubs, but maybe a step in the right direction. And I found that quite refreshing to hear someone who is a GP saying that actually some of the NHS managers need to pull their finger out a little bit. It can't just be an issue with politicians. All too often it's such a polarising thing. There are plenty of people who work in the NHS who, frankly, need to do better, OK? But anyway, more on that news that a Labour MP has claimed compulsory COVID isolation should be considered in an attempt to ease the strain on the NHS. Does anyone else feel like we're going back in time here a couple of years? Member of the Health Select Committee, Rachel Maskell, said if someone is infected, they need to isolate. She also added the importance of testing as a way of ensuring life doesn't continue as normal for people who test positive. I'm sorry, but what's the point of the vaccines then? What's the point of the vaccines? What's the point of all of this? To share his thoughts, I'm joined now by former member of the European Parliament, Rupert Lowe. Rupert, thank you very much. So, I'm sorry, but the whole point...
Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. The whole point of us waiting so long and locking down and waiting for the vaccines was so that once we had a vaccine, we could go and live our lives. I mean, this person seems to want us trapped in a time warp of COVID misery. Your views?
Well, my view is quite straightforward. I mean, we've got this ridiculous nanny state. And if you look at what happened during the lockdowns, which in my view were basically a battle between the older baby boomers who are frightened of dying and the young people whose lives have been messed up by all this erroneous mask wearing and all of the propaganda we had about protecting the NHS and everything else. So what's actually happened is we've not only wasted huge sums of money, which central planning always does, we've damaged the interests of the young people. We have actually now got more people dying of cancer. And if you look at excess death rates, it's appalling. But, people like Rachel Maskell, I'm afraid, can't help but, come up with some centrally planned scheme to enslave the British people. Why not just leave it to their good sense? The NHS, in my view, it needs complete reform. It's actually a fraud.
Yeah.
We actually pay vast amounts of national insurance, whether you're actually employed or whether an employer. And it's not a case of money. It's a case, as you said just now, of organisation.
It is.
You've got far too many people in what I call the marzipan lair who get paid huge.
It's ridiculous. We speak to nurses and paramedics.
Very good people. There's some very good people, Patrick, in the NHS, but they're led very badly by this marzipan lair who are political, half a cut above themselves, and basically arrogant. They just
say it as it is, Rupert. A lot of this lot are on the take, right? Absolutely 100% on the take. I mean, diversity and inclusion officers and all of this stuff. I mean, goodness, directors of lived experience. I mean, I'm sorry, what on earth are we paying for? But I just want to get you back onto a bit of track in terms of the COVID thing. There's a question here that I think, and everyone will have a different answer to this, and there's no judgment, I'm just keen to get your view on it. If you have COVID, should you isolate?
Well, I think if you've got COVID and you feel you're not well, then the best thing you can do is to do what most people do and stay at home. But that's a personal decision. That shouldn't be a statist, centrally planned decision. In the same way that, you know, whether you take, well, if you call them a vaccine or whether they're gene therapy, whatever you want to call it, whether you take that or not should be a matter for the individual. It should be individual choice. And this is where the country's gone completely wrong. We're now run by some very average people in Parliament, and they want to feel that they're doing something. And what they end up doing is making any situation like this worse. So I'm very clear. Look at Sweden. That man in Sweden, Anders Tegnell, should be applauded by the world. That guy stood up. He got it right. The numbers are now proving that lockdown is extremely damaging and had no beneficial effect. If anything, it was damaging. As you quite rightly say, even Fauci, who I dislike profoundly, has admitted that masks don't work. So why are we still banging on with the thin end of the wedge? And if we're not very careful, and if people don't wake up, we will have this gradual creep, and we'll have our freedoms taken away, which is terrible.
All right, look, Rupert, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. Rupert Lowe there, former European Parliament member. I am just finding out in my ear at the minute, I believe that we do have a Labour MP on, Bridget Phillipson, who is joining us now, Shadow Secretary for Education. I understand it. It's all kicking off here. Hey, there you go. Thank you very much. Hey, good to have you on the show. That was good. Right, OK, well, I suppose let's start, why not, with Rishi Sunak's more maths lessons. I mean, that does seem to be directly in your wheelhouse. I mean, I did note with some humour that Diane Abbott has said that she doesn't particularly appreciate the whole thing. The jokes write themselves there. Where are you on the idea that kids should be studying maths until they're 18?
I think it's absolutely essential that all young people leave school with the skills that they need to do well in life. But there was no plan from Rishi Sunak today about how he's going to deliver this reheated pledge. We know the government have failed on their targets where it comes to recruiting maths teachers over the course of the last decade. So it's just not going to happen. He has no means by which he can deliver this, and he hasn't set out any of the detail about what it amounts to. It really is just vacuous. And I think, you know, the Prime Minister should show us his workings about how he intends to make this happen.
He should show us his workings. What's Keir Starmer's solution to our education system?
Well, I think there's an awful lot that needs to change right across our education system. I think starting with when children arrive at school, far too many children arrive not ready to learn, and we see those attainment gaps opening up very early. That's why I believe we need to see reform of our childcare system and early years education to make sure that all children get a brilliant start in life. But we'd also be ending the tax breaks that private schools enjoy. That's £1.7 billion, and we put that money into delivering a brilliant state education for all of our children, recruiting more teachers into our classrooms, delivering better mental health support for our young people, and making sure that we're providing support for new head teachers as well. So we've set out quite a lot about the different set of priorities that a Labour government would have, and the change that we believe Britain needs to see.
OK, all right. And when it comes to the private school system, though, do you think that's going to be deeply popular? Some people would say that's just jester politics.
I think when it raises £1.7 billion and you can have a big impact in driving up standards across our country, I think it's incredibly important. And I've heard no good reason from the Prime Minister as to why he thinks private schools should continue to enjoy considerable tax breaks. I think those tax breaks are indefensible. And given the state of the public finances, you know, he should be making what I think is a straightforward and easy decision to invest that money into delivering a brilliant state education for every child. I mean, that is the vast majority of children in our country who go to their local state school, and their parents want to see improvements.
OK, all right. Some people would say that actually focusing on maths is quite good. There's been a lot of identity politics and wokeism in our state school system at the moment. Would you like to see more of a focus on kids being taught the curriculum and less of a focus on things like, oh, I don't know, transgender issues?
I want to make sure that all of our children leave school with a really strong grounding in the basics, so maths and English, and in IT and tech, and all of those important skills around digital, but also a broad curriculum too, because I think that's what parents want for their children. So the chance for their children to take part in sport, in music, in drama, in art, all of those really important areas of our curriculum too. But sadly, too many of our children, and the numbers are rising, are not getting that rounded education that they need to see, and aren't getting that really strong strong grounding in the basics. That's why, you know, we've got a different set of priorities, and we'd be investing that £1.7 billion into state education.
I get that. Realistically, though, that's going to take a little while to work its way through, isn't it? So scrapping tax breaks for private schools, OK, all right, fair enough. And then you've got the idea, well, not fair enough, some people would say, but you're going to do it. And then you've got, as well, you want to make sure that early years education for children is a little bit better. In the short term, what would you actually realistically do? Because 1.7 billion, some people say, well, that just gets sucked up. You'd probably pump that into the NHS. It'd be wasted by middle managers.
No, we've set out how we would invest that money directly into our schools and make sure that we do deliver that brilliant education. But what I've said as well, and I announced it last year at Labour Party conference, we would make sure that we have breakfast clubs for every primary school child in England so that parents can get to work. Often they have to turn down shifts, give up jobs because they can't make it work around the school day. And it would also give our children a really great start too. So there are lots of positive, practical changes that we've set out that I think would give children that great start they need, but would also help parents and see growth return to our economy, which, you know, the government have had a consistent failure to deliver in recent years.
Look, on that, obviously Rishi Sunak is saying he's keen to halve inflation, to reduce the national debt, for example, get the economy moving, more people in jobs, etc. The other thing that he was quite big on, at least allegedly anyway, was stopping the small boats coming across the channel. He set his stall out there. What would Labour do to stop that particular crisis?
Where it comes to what we're seeing at the moment with people making that perilous journey in small boats, we do need to see action to clamp down on those criminal gangs that exploit people, and we would make sure that we're setting up a new part of the National Crime Agency to take action and to make sure that people are not making that journey, which, you know, as we've seen all too often, ends in tragedy. But also we do need to see, you know, far more swift processing of asylum claims too. That's the reason we're spending so much money on accommodating people in hotels, is because of a complete failure of the government to process cases quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Look, all right, thank you very much. I've just got to ask you on this particular question now, given that it's obviously... I genuinely don't know the answer to this, so I've got to ask this. Did you go to state school?
Did I go to a...
State school.
A state school?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, I went to my local schools, local state schools.
All right, thank you very much. I've got to ask, though. All right, look, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show, and always a pleasure. Thank you very, very much. That's Bridget Phillipson there, who is Labour MP and, of course, Shadow Education Minister as well. Right, well, I'll tell you what, that was a bit of a whirlwind. Some unexpected stuff already on this show, but there we go. Let's get more reaction as well. We're going to be talking throughout the course of the show, more reaction on Rishi Sunak's Big 5 pledges. That was Labour MP and Shadow Secretary of State for Education, Bridget Phillipson. There we go. Right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to lob you over to your news now. When we come back, we'll have loads more to get stuck into with the rough and tumble of Rishi Sunak's Big 5 pledges.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. It is coming up to 5 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has outlined 5 key promises, setting out his government's priorities. Speaking in East London, Rishi Sunak issued a series of pledges, including promising to halve inflation to tackle the rising cost of living, growing the economy by pledging to create more opportunities across the country, reducing the national debt, which he says will secure the future of public services, cutting NHS waiting lists to ensure people can get care quicker, and stopping the small boats, ensuring people are detained and swiftly removed from the country. Now, while the Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, responded saying he's too weak to stand up to his party or vested interests, the Prime Minister said his government had already made steps towards improving the country.
Since I became Prime Minister, we've made progress, stabilised the economy and people's mortgage rates, provided £26 billion of support for the cost of living, invested billions more in schools, the NHS and social care, deepened ties with allies around the world on everything from Ukraine to our collective economic security, continued our unwavering support for the armed forces in their efforts to keep us safe, and set out a concrete plan to stop the boats and tackle the unfairness of illegal migration. But of course, we need to do more.
The Royal College of Nursing has responded to the Prime Minister's comments about the pressures facing the NHS, saying they're detached from reality. The RCN say the pressures being faced are far from ordinary winter pressures. It comes after the Health Secretary blamed a surge of flu cases, COVID and Strep A concerns for pressures the NHS faced over Christmas. The Prime Minister also touched on the ongoing rail strike, saying his government's door is always open for dialogue with unions. It comes on the second day of the first of two 48-hour strikes by rail workers, with over 40,000 RMT members walking off the job over pay, jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike tomorrow, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. While the RMT boss, Mick Lynch, told GB News the union wants a sensible agreement that everyone can support.
The message is that we do apologise for the inconvenience and we are working towards getting a solution. But there are a lot of people that are frustrated. We've got the health workers, education workers, firefighters are all getting the same treatment from the government, that they seem to want to extend the agony and not give people a square deal. And all we want is a square deal for our members, and then we can create a settlement.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it is back to Patrick.
Well, you're with me, Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up, Rishi Sunak has announced his vision for the UK. It's a 5-point promise tackling everything from the small boats crisis, halving inflation and making every school child study maths until they're 18. Like Will from The Inbetweeners. He's asking you to judge his premiership in number 10 on these pledges.
So, 5 promises. We will halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the votes. Those are the people's priorities. They are your government's priorities.
Well, good luck judging him on that, because you couldn't hear a word of it, could you? Is that good enough for you? No, of course not. We're also having a look at food costs. The price of nosh has hit record levels. More of us are also looking to ditch big brands in favour of store brands, own store brands. And I can't believe I'm actually saying this, ladies and gentlemen, but proper COVID restrictions are genuinely back on the table now. Yesterday, we had mask guidance. Now, we've got working from home and even social distancing. They want it to protect the NHS. Shouldn't the NHS be doing more to protect us? Let me know your thoughts, of course. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Get yourself on the telly. As always, 2 main topics in town for you today. Has Rishi won you over? I want to know what you think about that. And have you had enough of protecting the NHS? Right, I'm going to crack straight on, because Deputy Labour leader says that the public could be left asking, is that it? After hearing the Prime Minister's vision for the country. Reacting to Rishi Sunak's first major speech of the year, Angela Rayner said, for weeks, this speech was hyped up as his big vision. But the PM is too weak to stand up for his party or vested interests. Before we take a deeper look at some of the specifics of the Prime Minister's 5-point plan, let's, yet again, remind ourselves of what he had to say. Or not, apparently. There we go. Anyway, GB News' political reporter Olivia Utley is live in central London with us now. Maybe you can enlighten us, Olivia. What were some of the specifics, Olivia, of what he had to say?
Well, he had a 5-point plan for getting the country back on track. That included, see if I can remember off the top of my head, getting inflation halved, growing the economy, cutting NHS waiting lists, sorting out the small boats, and make sure that national debt is falling. Now, 3 of those, I think we can safely say, are already predicted, in some respect at least, to happen this year anyway. So we know that inflation is going to go down from the very high point that it's currently at. We know that the economy, well, we hope that the economy, it's predicted the economy will grow in the next year, at least to some respect. And he didn't put a number on how much he expects the NHS waiting list to fall. He suggested suggested that by the middle of the next year, we might be down to waiting lists of a year and a half. Well, that's not hugely ambitious. The other points, though, are pretty ambitious. To say that he's going to fix the small boats crisis is a very big promise indeed. Yeah. And it's not quite clear how he's going to do it. He came up with this another five-point plan a few weeks ago, which included sending back Albanians who come to this country illegally. But there wasn't much more meat on the bones of that. And ministers have already conceded that actually just sending Albanians back won't scratch the surface of the problem.
Yes, indeed. Right, now, just a big word that keeps coming up in my inbox here is trust, and a fundamental lack of it when it comes to Rishi Sunak. Why do you think that is?
I think that Rishi Sunak was starting from a bit of a back foot. Obviously, he lost the leadership election in the summer. He was popular with his own backbenchers, but not popular with the Conservative Party at large. And it's taken a while to sort of win over the Conservative members, let alone the country. We've obviously gone through a pretty turbulent time for politics generally in the last few years. So trust in politicians of both parties, of all stripes really, is at an all-time low. Something that does come up when I speak to just people on the street about Rishi Sunak is he comes across as very, very slick, which to some inspires a sense of confidence that he sort of knows what he's doing. But to others, there's a kind of sense of the spin of the Tony Blair, David Cameron era, which people are perhaps sick of. So that might be why this trust issue is coming up. Rishi Sunak, it must be said, is very keen to get trust in people. He mentions trust a lot. He talks about not promising more than he can deliver. And actually, the difference between him and his immediate predecessor, Liz Truss, was his promises were quite narrow in their scope, unlike Truss, who obviously wanted to change the world many steps at a time.
Yeah.
But we did see a bit more of Rishi Sunak today than we have seen before. And it was interesting seeing him talk about social issues, something which we really haven't heard very much of at all from any Prime Minister recently.
Yes, actually, and that went a bit under the radar. I'm going to come on to talk about this a little bit later in the show, talking about things like family and community as well, which is quite nice because I do think we've absolutely lost that recently. Not necessarily family, but definitely community. I mean, certainly around the London area, you could be absolutely anywhere. Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Utley, they're our political reporter. And well done, Olivia, as well, for being beaten up by your own hair in the wind there and managing to continue unfazed. You love to see it. That's his professionalism. Well, let's focus on one of the key pledges made by the Prime Minister. Earlier on today, Rishi Sunak said the government would pass new laws to stop small boats making illegal channel crossings, an issue that he's repeatedly called one of his top priorities as Prime Minister. This, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, drills down into what I was talking to Olivia about earlier on, which is that trust issue. People, I think anyway, have just given up on anyone actually sorting out the small boats crisis. Rishi Sunak says he wants to be judged on his actions. It's better all come together quickly for the guy. Otherwise, well, frankly, I suppose people will just think it's an absolute waste of time, won't they? In the last hour, we caught up with Conservative MP Laura Trott. This was regarding the migrant crisis. This is what she had to say exclusively to us.
What's very interesting about this, if you look at the number of Albanian immigrants who are sent back to Albania in other countries, for example, France, it's in the 80-90%, whereas in the UK, it's 40 to 45, I think. You know, Albanians make up a large number of the illegal immigration which is coming into this country. It's something that absolutely needs to be dealt with, and I think that's why the Albanian deal will make a difference. But he wants to go further than that. You know, he set out a plan in the House of Commons a few weeks ago, and then he was talking about further legislation today. So this is not something that can be solved easily or quickly, but I do think the Albanian deal will make a difference.
Well, there you go. Rishi Sunak saying that he wants to get rid of the asylum seeker backlog. That's a big ask, of course it is. He's also saying he wants to stop the small boats, which is, again, another pretty big ask. Joining me now is former Home Office Special Advisor Claire Pearsall. Claire, thank you very much. Now, the British public has been absolutely battered by failed promises and platitudes, etc., when it comes to the migrant crisis. No one so far has managed to get to grips with it. In fact, it's the worst, literally the worst it's ever been. What's different this time with Rishi Sunak?
Well, I don't think there is anything different, and that's the really despairing fact about it, is that there were a lot of hopeful words coming out of the Prime Minister's mouth today, but absolutely no detail on what he was going to do to make this happen. And unfortunately, we've heard this over the last 2.5 years from various different people, that they were going to stop the boats, they're going to stop asylum seekers coming, they're going to remove people quickly. And absolutely nothing has been done because people are failing to understand, where are you going to put them? Where are you sending them back to? And where are the agreements to do so? So until you get that sorted, these are just very nice words to have, but that's it.
Yeah, now, a lot of people, of course, care about the NHS. That was one of his pledges. A lot of people absolutely care about the money in their pocket, inflation, national debt, work opportunities. That's unequivocal. Those are massive things. People really, really, really do care about the small boats. And it is a totemic thing because you can literally see it. It's all very well and good having some inflation figures on a spreadsheet and them looking like they're going in the right direction. But you can physically see migrants arriving at your local hotel. You can physically see them coming across the channel. If he doesn't get this right, has he just lost the next general election?
I think he has, to be honest. It's one of these issues where a lot has been promised. Now, I live in the county of Kent, so you can imagine how people in this county feel about it. People see them, migrants coming across the beaches, they see hotels being taken and used up with no real plan as to how to deal with the individuals coming over. So I think that we have a really messy set of local elections coming up in May of this year. I think that will give you a feel of how angry people are across the country. And I think it will vary county by county. I think that there are some who aren't affected by it, but those that are, I think you'll see a real turn away for the Conservatives unless these details are hammered out.
But practically, is he actually going to be able to do anything? Is these phrases going to stop the boats? He's got to change laws, hasn't he? He's got to get us out of the ECHR. I mean, this is going to take time if it's indeed possible.
Well, it will. It will take an enormous amount of time to get these things through and to get it sorted. And the first thing that you have to look at is, what are you doing about the backlog of asylum claims of people that are already here? And unless you sort that out and unless you have those agreements with other countries to return individuals, you're not going to get any further forward, and you're just going to sort of work on the fringes of this without getting to the heart of the problem. And you can't stop the boats coming over unless you have a deterrent in place, which we clearly don't at the moment.
Well, no, but I wonder whether or not he's missing a trick here, because at least there is at least the threat of a flight taking off to Rwanda at some point in the near future. There is at least the threat of a P&O ferry being used as some form of token offshore, hear me out, some kind of token offshore migrant processing centre. There is talk of, at least potentially anyway, there being some kind of deal with Albania or stronger deportation cases, etc. Shouldn't he be going on the attack and going, all right, you might not be happy with what we've done now, give me a bit of time to do it, but if you vote for that guy over there, Keir Starmer, I tell you what, we won't have borders.
But you can always point the finger at the opposition, which is what we are incredibly good at doing. And that's the whole of politics in a nutshell. But unless you can actually back that up, you say about Rwanda flights, they may take off in the future. I think it's going to be a long time in the future. I don't think the public believe that it is ever going to happen. Otherwise, it would have done right now. So I think that, yes, you can play that blame game, but essentially, if you don't have the details, it's a wasted point.
Just finally, Claire, a little bit off from the channel topic and just more generally about Rishi Sunak. I've said it before, I'll just say it again now for people who are just joining us. I obviously always have the email inbox in front of me here, and Boris Johnson could have physically committed a very heinous crime on the steps of Downing Street, and people, thousands of people, would have told me that it didn't matter and they would still vote for the guy. Rishi Sunak is just not as well liked as Boris Johnson at all. Why is that?
I think there is a large part of the public who see that it was Rishi Sunak who brought down Boris Johnson. Now, whether that is true or not, that is the narrative that is out there. And they see him as the one who betrayed Boris, the person that they liked, the person that they voted for. And I think that really is the crux of the matter. I think that Rishi Sunak has an awful lot of ground to make up, but he will never be as good as Boris Johnson at that rabble-rousing speech, as we've seen today.
Yeah. You're absolutely spot on. Claire, thank you very much. Claire Purcell, who is a former Home Office Special Advisor. Right, we're moving on. She mentioned there, Claire, didn't she, about the local elections that are coming up and whether or not Tories are going to get a bit of a kicking now, what the public mood will be like. And right on cue, we have Conservative Councillor for Windsor and Maidenhead, Stuart Carroll, who's joining me right now. Stuart, great to have you back on the show, of course. Fantastic. What did you make, as a local councillor, of what Rishi Sunak had to say, his 5 promises? Do you feel more secure in your job now?
Good afternoon, Patrick. Good afternoon to your viewers. Look, I'm pleased to see that Rishi Sunak is focusing on certainly the big issue of small boats and the border, which, as we've discussed before, is a massive issue. I think in terms of the economy, it's quite clear we've got to continue to keep getting inflation under control. Debt has to come down. We need to see a much more radical plan for growth, though. It's not enough just to talk about growth. We've got to actually say, what does that mean? Where we're going to emphasise, where we're going to prioritise. We've got to start really building up our manufacturing base again across various sectors, really looking at a dynamic life sciences strategy and technological strategy. And I think on the NHS, we've got to, as a country, start having a serious discussion about what the NHS is for and what it's not for. Because if we're going to deal with these backlogs, I think we've got to start prioritising. The NHS is in peril. It's right, it's a priority, but we've got to have a bigger conversation than just the emergency we're currently in.
Right, Stuart, just stay where you are, because I just want to play a little clip of something and get a bit of reaction to it. Earlier today, we also heard an alternative view, and this is important, actually. It slips under the radar for obvious reasons. Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, comes out and, you know, issues 5 promises and all of this stuff. So this is the main headline of the day. But something that happened earlier on, which is very, very important, is the leader of the Reform Party, which, by the way, is now polling in plenty of places above the Liberal Democrats. So, you know, it's gone from just being a kind of fringe party that was, well, I don't want to say relatively easy ignored, but relatively easily ignored anyway. And now they are, you know, really becoming front and centre. And they have promised, Richard Tice, the leader of the Reform Party, has promised, a cast iron promise, he says, to stand candidates against every Tory in every seat, apart from in Northern Ireland. Well, he outlined his vision for the United Kingdom and for the country, and I think we can actually just hear a little bit of a clip about it now. This is Richard Tice, he's the leader of Reform UK.
Surely one of the most important things that a government can do is to maintain secure borders, to know who's coming in and who's going out. They kept saying that one of the Brexit advantages that many of us fought for so hard was to take control of our borders. But now the Tories have completely abandoned it. Nearly 46,000 illegal migrants coming across the Channel. Over 1.1 million additional people coming into the country on a gross basis in the year to June 2022.
Stuart, welcome back. This is local councillor Stuart Carroll. If Rishi Sunak doesn't get to grips with what's going on in the Channel, there's a chap there, Richard Tyson, Reform Party, who clearly have strong views on it and will be standing against, by the sounds of it, every single Conservative MP at the next general election. That's a problem for the Tories, isn't it?
It is a major problem, and that's precisely why, on a political level, it's imperative that the Prime Minister and the government gets a grip of this issue. See Sunak talking about it as a priority, but we have to go above and beyond the talk and actually start walking the walk. That does mean, as we talked about previously, which I find with Councillor Johnson. And what I do want to see is actually us becoming a lot more rigorous about legal review, legal application. And if we take, for example, the deal with France, it's all well and good having patrols and more resources, but we need to have legal enforcement. We can't just be patrolling, seeing people crossing the Channel in that manner, ending on our shores, and take them. We've got to actually, I think, start a much harder strategic game here with France and our international colleagues. Otherwise, the political consequences are going to be major.
Look, Stuart, thank you very, very much. Stuart Carroll there, who is local councillor in the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, who's been very vocal on this channel numerous times about what's been going on in the channel, actually, and wanted to get his reactions there in relation to one of Rishi Sunak's big 5 promises. We've done a lot of them today. We've had his education lot, we've had the NHS stuff. We've also spoken a lot about the economy, the small boats things. I know is a massive issue that's very close to your heart. Now, I'm just going to go quickly anyway back into my inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. This has been one of the most emailed into shows that I've ever done here, and that is a very high bar, actually, because you wonderful viewers and listeners are not shy of dishing out your opinion. Dam has been on, who says, Patrick, you keep asking why the word trust keeps coming up in relation to Rishi Sunak, and it does. This is a massive thing. People go, I just don't trust you. And there is a juxtaposition here, isn't there, right? Because Boris Johnson, right, we all know, I was a big fan of Boris Johnson, a lot of people were, not always the most trustworthy chap in the world, right? But did it with a bit of a nod and a smile. But people would have gone into battle behind Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak, people don't seem to trust him. Dam's got the answer, maybe. He says it's simple. He stabbed Boris in the back, yet he denied it. Apparently, there you go. So that's maybe the view there. A lot of you as well, of course, saying that actually, look, you don't really like Rishi Sunak because you've not had the chance to vote for him. And I wonder whether or not this just is going to be a massive ball and chain around Rishi Sunak's neck until the next general election. Because people thought, well, they didn't like the fact that maybe Boris got biffed, OK. Then Liz Truss, well, at least the members got a vote on Truss. She was absolutely cut off at the knees. If you look at the opinion polling, by the way, Liz Truss was not doing hugely worse than Rishi Sunak is now, but there was noise, this is as bad as it gets, this is terrible, this is absolutely awful. She announced things a bit tin-eared when it came to the economy, but actually not massively radical stuff. Bank of England biffed her completely. Now Rishi Sunak comes in, anointed by a load of MPs. You've not had the chance to actually vote for him. You've had absolutely no say, even if you're a Conservative Party member, have you? And I think this is a massive thing. It's certainly an issue for Paul. He just says, it's simple. Until there's a public vote on Rishi, he is not my Prime Minister. And that's a problem. However, just one final one. Sarah's been on. Sarah says, give the guy a chance. He's asked for time. I'm willing to give it to him. The alternative is much worse. I was going to say it's a mixed bag in the inbox. To be honest with you, it's not really. The reality is that a lot of you don't particularly like Rishi Sunak, it would appear. Why not, though? Tell me why. I want to drill down in this. Did he say anything there that you particularly disagreed with? The 5 key points, realistically, which were, well, I can narrow it down to a few, actually, because it's just, you know, NHS, immigration and the economy, really, if we really break that all down. Which bits of that did you agree with or disagree with, and why do you or do you not trust him? It's me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, the price of food has jumped to record levels, heaping more pressure on the government to take action. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, will break down those numbers for you. He'll crunch the numbers, but before that, it's a short break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Right, welcome back. We've done the small boat stuff. We did the NHS stuff a little bit earlier on. Let's talk about the money stuff now. Inflation shows no immediate signs of waning. That's the word to the British Retail Consortium's chief executive, as food prices remain close to 40-year highs. New figures show a rise to 13.3% last month, as many cash-strapped households struggle with the high costs over Christmas, and fresh food prices saw the biggest rise, marking its highest monthly inflation rate since records began back in 2005. Liam Elgin joins me now, our economics and business editor, with On the Money.
You'll have to sing the
I'll just have to sing it. Da, 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 On the Money. Right, Liam, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. There we are. No expense spared with the promos here at GB News. Right, Liam, we want to broaden it out a bit. I feel like we've kind of gone around the houses a bit with this inflation stuff. What do you want to talk to me about? Because this speech with Rishi Sunak hasn't gone down particularly well.
Yeah, let's just quickly go through the numbers.
Yeah.
So the inflation number, let's just do the first graphic here if we can. The inflation number for fresh food was 14.3% in November. So that means in November last year, 2022, a basket of food was 14.3% higher than November in the year before. The December fresh food inflation number, here's the number that came out today from the British Retail Consortium, that was 15%. That is a record. So food price inflation, that's much higher than general inflation, which is the consumer price index. In November, that consumer price index was 10.7%, and the December consumer price index number will come out on the 18th of January. So clearly, food is a lot more expensive, going up a lot faster than other goods, and that really harms lower income households. And this is where I think Rishi Sunak got wrong today. This sounded to me, as I said when we were on chatting with Tom Harwood, like a kind of campaign manager's speech delivered by a professional politician. I didn't really see any empathy. Telling people who are really worried they're going to lose their home or about their job or how they're going to pay their energy bill that their kid needs to do more maths is not a way to particularly endear a politician, you know, talking from on high, a very wealthy man, with all respect to him, to ordinary men and women.
Are we being a bit mean on Rishi Sunak? You know, I do relish our points of difference between ourselves and the BBC, and it does appear, you know, the BBC do tend to bash the Tories quite a lot, and I am very conscious of the fact that, you know, we sat through Rishi Sunak's speech, and I wasn't massively impressed by it, and clearly a lot of our viewers in the inbox weren't either. Are we bashing him here?
As you said earlier, politics is about policy, but it's also about personality and first impressions. And this is the first impression of him for a lot of people who aren't obsessed by politics and the news as we are. It's his first major speech as Prime Minister. And I don't think he did enough to connect. He sounded like a young Tony Blair without all this kind of freshness and the hope which New Labour did then represent in the mid-1990s. I was a political correspondent at the time. The Tories have been in power for well over a decade. They seemed tired and all the rest of it. And I don't think that he really did enough. There was not nearly enough about housing, which is a touchstone issue, not just for people, you know, 30-somethings, 40-somethings trying to buy their own home slightly further up the income scale, but for people on the council house waiting list. There are 1.3 million of them, a lot of them in those red wall constituencies. I didn't hear anything about social housing. I didn't hear anything about the intergenerational inequalities which there are in the UK. You know, saying, oh, we need more innovation, we need our kids to do more maths. Yeah, they're all very worthy things. And he's right, of course he's right. But in politics, you've got to put the thing that is needed in front of people at the opposite time, and I don't think strategically he did that.
It seemed a little bit like a sticking plaster job. I think he identified all of the key areas, all of the correct key areas that need sorting. You got the small boats, you got the NHS, for the economy, obviously, right? He didn't miss the target on any of those. But for me, Liam, it was lacking a really bold, clear rallying cry vision. You know, we needed someone, I think we need someone, anyway, who we can really unite behind. And this, to me, felt a little bit devoid of ambition or true ideology, perhaps.
And there was no jeopardy in it. Pretty much all those pledges, they're probably going to happen anyway. Inflation's probably going to halve this year. We're probably going to get back to growth sometime this year. The as Tom and I and you probed our various guests and got on Twitter and made phone calls, we finally found out that the pledge to start bringing down the national debt, that's within 5 years. He didn't say that in the speech, did he?
No, he didn't.
So I would like to have seen I would have liked to have seen pledges that actually inspired more of a sense that he's not just going to make pledges that he knows are going to be fulfilled so he can claim credit later.
Yeah.
Things where he's actually going to have to really go the extra mile in terms of to deliver leadership for British people at a time when there is a lot of angst out there. I don't think he really tapped into the angst and gave the sense that he really understood it.
No, look, I agree with you. One thing that he did say, and this resonated with me anyway, is he spoke about having stronger families and a stronger sense of community in this country. That's a good thing. We need more of that.
Absolutely, but it's almost like motherhood and apple pie. What's a Conservative for if they don't want... I mean, everyone wants family values, right? Even people who don't see the traditional family unit as maybe you may see it, man, woman, 2.4 kids.
Yeah.
You know, he rightly so, in the UK, nodded to those people who have less traditional views of the family, but who doesn't want more family? Who doesn't want more innovation? Who doesn't want more growth? It was almost a sort of series of banal statements about the obvious. There was no risk involved, and where there isn't, you know, leadership means risk. Leadership means putting your reputation on the line, and I thought he played it far too safe at a time when the country is looking for leadership.
There's clearly a trust issue with Rishi Sunak. This word keeps coming up time and time again, and I can understand why. There's a sense of a lack of personality as well, and a lack of a big rallying cry, some kind of bombastic uniting figure. By the way, as well, similar stuff when it comes to the Labour Party, which leads me on to this final question to you, Liam, which is the amount of people politically homeless. And earlier today, we had Richard Tice, leader of Reform UK, who came up, at least said, hey, here's my vision, for example, and he's promised to stand, at least at this stage, anyway, promised to stand a candidate against every single Conservative MP, so every single seat in the UK at the next general election. That could split the Tory vote. That could be a massive headache for Rishi Sunak.
You know, there's been a debate among the media today. Were GB News right to go to Richard Tice's statement and go live, as we say, on Richard Tice's statement? And I think we absolutely were right. That doesn't mean I agree. It's not about what I think with Richard Tice, though I do talk to him a lot about policy, and I think some of his policies are pretty coherent, like 20% starting rate of income, you know, 20 grand for your starting rate of income tax. I think that's a completely progressive policy, highlighting that many poor people disproportionately pay high amounts of their money on income tax. All of that is a really good policy. The important thing is, as you say, that if Tice and his guys stand in every Tory seat, they could easily determine the next general election, because they will split the Tory vote in key marginals. So just like a bloke called Nigel Farage, and of course Nigel is our GB News colleague, is chairman of Reform, but you and I make up our own minds about things. But just as UKIP basically forced the Conservatives to at least hold a referendum on the European Union membership back in 2016, I think Tice, given the support that Reform is generating, could force the Tories to do certain things between now and the general election. And I don't hear Rishi Sunak dismissing Reform as fruitcakes, nutcases and racist, the way David Cameron dismissed, wrongly in my view, dismissed you.
Absolutely wrongly, yeah, indeed. Liam, thank you very much. You've been great throughout the course of this show. Liam Halligan, their economics and business editor. Look, loads of you getting in touch on this. Rosemary says, after many years of voting Tory, I will most definitely be voting Reform. I'm sure by now you will have all heard, of course, Rishi Sunak's 5 promises. We are doing Tice versus Sunak next. Make sure you get your views coming in. What did you like about what Rishi had to say? What did you not like? Did it sway you in any way, shape or form? And do you trust him to deliver on any of those issues? GB Views at gbnews.uk. It's the battle of the parties next. It's Sunak versus Richard Tice, leader of Reform UK, to set out his vision today. So who won the war of the words? We're going to be finding out very, very shortly. But first, it's your latest news headlines with Tatiana.
Patrick, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has outlined 5 key promises setting out his government's priorities. Speaking in East London, Rishi Sunak issued a series of pledges, including promising to halve inflation to tackle the rising cost of living, growing the economy by pledging to create more opportunities across the country, reducing the national debt, which he says will secure the future of public services, cutting NHS waiting lists to ensure people can get care quicker, and stopping the small boats, ensuring people are detained and swiftly removed from the country. Now, while the Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner responded, saying he's too weak to stand up to his party or vested interest, the Prime Minister said his government had already made steps towards improving the country.
Since I became Prime Minister, we've made progress, stabilised the economy and people's mortgage rates, provided £26 billion of support for the cost of living, invested billions more in schools, the NHS and social care, deepened ties with allies around the world on everything from Ukraine to our collective economic security, continued our unwavering support for the armed forces in their efforts to keep us safe, and set out a concrete plan to stop the boats and tackle the unfairness of illegal migration. But of course, we need to do more.
The Royal College of Nursing has responded to the Prime Minister's comments about the pressures facing the NHS, saying they're detached from reality. The RCN say the pressures being faced are far from ordinary winter pressures. It comes after the Health Secretary blamed a surge of flu cases, COVID and Strep A concerns for pressures the NHS faced over the Christmas period. The Prime Minister also touched on the ongoing rail strike, saying his government's door is always open for dialogue with unions. It comes on the second day of the first of two 48-hour strikes by rail workers, with over 40,000 RMT members walking off the job over paid jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike tomorrow, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. And author Faye Weldon, who's best known for her novel The Life and Love of a She-Devil, has died at the age of 91. She published more than 30 novels in her career, as well as short stories and plays written for television, radio and the stage. She was also one of the writers on the popular 1970s drama series Upstairs, Downstairs. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, Rishi Sunak today laid out his domestic plans for the UK, pledging to tackle inflation, long NHS waiting lists and, crucially as well, the Channel migrant crisis. However, the man who many see as his chief rival on the right, Richard Tice of Reform UK, also delivered a speech today, blasting the government and promising tax cuts and stronger borders. So, which party, the Conservatives or Reform, has the better plan for Britain in 2023? I believe we can actually just hear a little clip and see a little clip anyway of Richard Tice. Bit of context, been banging on about Rishi Sunak all day. Let's hear from Tice, shall we? Or not. Anyway, right, joining me now is political commentator Patrick O'Flynn and Dave White, a Reform UK councillor. There we go. Right, OK, so who won the battle, do you think, you two? I'll start with you, Patrick O'Flynn, who is, of course, that political commentator. What do you make of this, then? Do you think that Richard Tice maybe will usurp Rishi Sunak? He's going to stand in every single seat, supposedly.
Well, I thought Richard Tice had the easier task because clearly things haven't gone particularly well in the last couple of years. But as to his big idea today, which was raising the personal tax allowance from £12,500 to £20,000 at a cost of £40 billion a year, to me that's sort of got the smack of Trussonomics. Perhaps Richard's the new Liz Truss there. I personally feel that the personal allowance is high enough and more people should be paying at least some tax. So, for instance, I prefer they brought back the 10p starting rate of tax and pushed the standard rate threshold much higher. So I was actually quite pleased with Rishi Sunak's speech, believe it or not, because of the 5 priorities, I think, finally gives him some definition. And I was delighted to see the boats issue being a key one of those.
Well, exactly. Look, there's no denying, I think, that Rishi Sunak identified 5 key issues facing this country. Is whether or not he's actually got the solutions or people trust him to enact the solutions in order to carry that out. And Dave, I'll bring you in here. Dave White, who's a Reform UK councillor. On that issue, Reform are onto a winner, aren't they? Because they've not been in power, which means that people haven't built up a visceral disdain for them yet.
Absolutely. As I say, it's easier in opposition. Easier to criticise, but what Reform UK, excuse me, have come up with is a set of credible plans, a costed manifesto, and a real alternative. And what's exciting about Reform UK, and particularly comparing the 2 press releases, the 2 statements today, was that Rishi Sunak was completely lacking on any detail or policies or solutions, whereas Richard Tice went in at the deep end and addressed people's real issues.
Dave, I'll stick with you for a second on this now, though. The criticism, and actually, to be honest with you, Dave, in the inbox is the only criticism I'm really getting of Reform and Richard Tice at the minute, is that deliberately standing in every single seat means that you're standing against the Tories, which means that you may well split the vote, which means that you, my friend, are guaranteeing a Labour government.
No, I'd not say that's the case. I'm in Barnsley. I'm a councillor in Barnsley. It's a very strong Labour area, always has been. The support that I got when I switched over to Reform from all manner of people, from Labour Party supporters, from floating voters, but not only that, from people who were sort of completely politically homeless and admitted that not voted for the last 10, 15 years. So it is a credible alternative, and we're finding with membership that we're pulling people in from various parties and various areas. It's not just the Tory vote.
Patrick O'Flynn, I'll bring you back in there. Dave mentioned about people being politically homeless. Does Rishi Sunak offer them a home? I think they're a bit sick and tired of it. They want to move out. I think they probably want to go and move into Reform, don't they?
Yeah, many of them do. I think Rishi Sunak is trying to stitch back together the coalition that won for Boris Johnson in 2019, because the 3 main subject areas, the economy, the NHS and immigration, particularly illegal immigration, those are the top 3 issues of 2019 Tory voters. I must agree that it's wrong to criticise Reform for saying, oh, they'll let Labour in. I think offering voters new choices and more choices is always a good thing. And I think more power to the elbow of Reform, particularly in places like Barnsley, where I know they have very strong support.
Patrick, I'll stay with you. Personality matters in politics. Keir Starmer, I've often said, is so wooden that birds are nesting in him. Rishi Sunak reminds me of Will from The In-Betweeners. It is desolate, isn't it? And his speech today did absolutely nothing to change that. In fact, I would go as far as to say that a really surprising amount of GB News viewers and listeners, I'm looking at the evidence here in my inbox, hated it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm the odd one out there because I didn't quite hate it. I thought it's very much a Tony Blair tribute act with the 5 key pledges.
This is my point, Patrick. Sorry, let me just qualify this, Patrick. Sorry, because I maybe fluffed the question slightly there, because it's about the personality, right? And they didn't like the personality vacuum. It was very stilted. You could tell he was reading an auto cue, which, let's be honest, the way I ask questions, I could probably do with a bit more of.
Well, I thought he got into his stride. Yeah, it started off quite stilted. I thought he was actually very good when it got to the Q&A session with the media, and that did put me very much in mind of Tony Blair. Now, whether a Tony Blair personality still has the magic with the voters after all the disappointments that followed his later years is yet to be seen. But I think Sunak will be judged on the content of his delivery in the next 18 months or so, and particularly if he goes the extra mile, strains every sinew as he said he would to stop the small boat crossings, and does things which ignite fury among the liberal left establishment. I think he's got a chance of rerunning that feeling that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings engendered in autumn 2019. They didn't get us out of the EU then, but they were thwarted by the establishment, and they used that as a springboard to get a majority. I can see Sunak doing the same on illegal immigration, and then going into the next election with more radical manifesto proposals on that issue.
Dave, are the British public right to not trust Rishi Sunak when it comes to things like the small boats crisis?
Absolutely. I mean, the 5 pledges, obviously inflation's going to drop anyway. People are aware of that growth in the economy. That was Trussonomics, and she got rejected by the Westminster Party. The boats and the NHS waiting list, let's be honest, I mean, Cameron was talking about the NHS waiting lists. I think people have completely lost trust and confidence. And how long does it take to stop the boats coming across? They're not even putting a timescale on this. The trust is gone. And when you mentioned the personality aspect of this, you know, I found this speech quite condescending and patronising to a lot of people. When he was talking about education, mathematics, and some of these things, people are sat and daren't put the heating on. People are sat in ambulances waiting to go in hospital, and they're thinking, what has this actually got to do with me? It was almost like almost a manifesto speech. It's almost as if Sunak was fresh into the job and newly elected in a new party. He's forgotten the last 12 years. There's no excusing that.
Look, it was very much the kind of thing. It was a bit like a Dragon's Den pitch, I thought, actually, to be honest with you. Patrick, making children almost at gunpoint study maths till the age of 18. I mean, the Conservative Party is in desperate need of trying to entice young voters. Dare I say that is absolutely not the right way to go about it. Nobody votes for the bloke that made them study maths.
No, well, I tend to agree with you. You know, I was glad to finish studying maths at the age of 16. I think if maths is taught well, then 11 years of education should be enough to bring people up to standard. And then let's move on to voluntary maths for the people with aptitude for that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm sorry. And also, I'm yet to see any evidence for forcing people to study something for an extra 2 years that they don't want to study. I don't really think delivers any results anyway. I don't think all of a sudden we're going to end up with a load of boffins, are we, really, when it comes to that? Dave, I've got to ask you, Reform UK, supposedly on the march, supposedly anyway in plenty of areas doing much better than the Liberal Democrats, although it's not too hard, I suppose. I mean, I don't remember the last time I heard from a lot of those. We did have Christine Jardine pop up rather unexpectedly earlier on in the show, but I'm not sure anyone booked her. But, Dave, what is it going to take for people to actually get into that polling booth and when they've got that pencil or the pen in their hand there and the options in front of them, actually changing the habit of a lifetime, actually shifting from Labour to Tory? Because what they say outside the polling booth is different to what goes on in it a lot of the time.
I agree. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of raising awareness. I talk to people now and they say to me, well, tell me about your policies, tell me about what Reform actually stand for. But there's an interest there, a genuine interest. People want to learn. They want an alternative now. The Lib Dems, as you rightly say, there's no message, no visibility whatsoever. So there's a huge amount of disillusioned Labour voters who are looking for an alternative as well. Now, we're getting our act together, and that's reflected in membership and activity and various other things. This is happening now. It's not something for a year, 18 months' time. It's happening already, and people are asking us the questions.
All right, look, both of you stay where you are, if that's all right. I am now. I've been threatening to do this for a while, but I believe I'm really going to do it this time. We're going to hear from Richard Tice, who is the leader of Reform UK. This is what he had to say earlier.
We've had 12 years of government by various incarnations of what I call the con-socialists. Taxes, the highest for 70 years. Government spending, the highest for about 50 years. Inflation,
the highest for 30 years plus. And productivity collapsing everywhere, the lowest for at least 30 years.
OK, there we go. Can I bring back up the two political gurus that I had earlier on? Political commentator Patrick O'Flynn, Dave White, a Reform UK councillor. Patrick, let's be honest, if closer to the election Tice wheels out Farage, then he's won a lot of seats, hasn't he?
I certainly think he's won a lot of votes. I do think the Conservative higher-ups are still terrified of Nigel, and that Nigel can bring some magic to the table for reform.
But what we're seeing here is a difference. And Dave, I'll bring you back in now. Dave White, if you're just joining us as a Reform UK councillor, right? Rishi Sunak, to me, doesn't appear to have a particularly robust ideology. Maybe he does, right? But perhaps he's not expressing it in as a bombastic way as, dare I say it, Boris Johnson, who ironically didn't appear to actually act on his supposed ideology, did he? But with Rishi Sunak, he doesn't appear to have it. Does Richard Tice have a proper ideology? Has he got a proper flag that he can stick in the ground and people at least know what they're voting for?
Yes, I think with Reform and with Richard, people recognise that there's a genuine interest in the working class, in the working man. The tax reforms that have been put forward, you know, this has been thought about and debated at great length. There is actual care and concern there. And when the Prime Minister manages again to insert into his speech how privileged he was to work at his parents' pharmacy, which we all are now aware of, thankfully, yeah, privileged is the right word, but it's very difficult to compare the two speeches there, because Richard's was detailed and talking about real issues, and we got five, you know, almost flippant comments and, you know, challenges for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, look, we had Fishy Rishi initially, and that was basically down to the fact that a lot of people clearly still have not forgiven him for the perceived stabbing of Boris Johnson in the back. Now, Patrick, have we got wishy-washy Rishi? But has he actually done enough to kind of almost give himself enough rope to hang himself with? Because if we still have small boats coming over the channel in a couple of years' time, which we almost inevitably will, then, you know, that's a broken promise, I suppose. Inflation, all right, that's kind of predicted to go down anyway. With it, you could argue that, you know, the economy might improve slightly by the time the next election rolls around. NHS waiting lists, we're just coming out of a horror show of a period, aren't we, the winter period? So I suppose there will be times when he can point to the waiting list going down, maybe. But I'm just wondering whether or not he was a bit too wishy-washy. People want more substance. Was it that thing out of the thick of it where it's like the announcement is there's not an announcement?
No, I don't think that's quite fair. I think the first 2 months of his premiership have been wishy-washy, Richie, and, you know, what on earth does he stand for? You know, what's the big idea? And we had this pre-announcement about compulsory maths to 18, which is sort of an echo of a John Major Cones hotline level of big idea. But the actual speech, I thought, was quite useful politically to Sunak and the Tories. It's identified a set of priorities, and I think the key one is the small boats, and he'll clearly bust a gut to deliver some improvement there.
And we await with interest what Sir Keir Starmer has to say tomorrow. Both of you, thank you very, very much. Political commentator Patrick O'Flynn, Dave White there as well, a Reform UK councillor. Loads of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Rishi Sunak's bold vision for Britain in 2023, which we've been discussing throughout the show. Beverly says, if Sunak was interested in this country, he would have more polytechnic-type colleges to give those who struggle with academic studies an opportunity to gain work qualifications. I could not agree more. The idea that you want a load of kids who maybe don't like maths to sit there and slave away for another 2 years doing maths is absolutely bonkers. Get people doing practical trades. Stop stigmatising people who want to do practical trades. We need more practical tradesmen. We need fewer people, in my opinion, going to university, actually, doing Mickey Mouse degrees, saddling themselves with a lifetime full of debt. And you know what, Rishi? I thought he was bang out of touch there. Alistair says, Mr Sunak has signed the political 5-point death order for the Conservative Party. I say bring back Boris. And you know what? There's a heck of a lot of this going about, Alistair, isn't there? A lot of the Bring Back Boris brigade are out in force. Matt says the Conservatives have no chance of saving seats at the next election. You know what? Can I just say, this show, I have found myself sounding more and more like the BBC than ever before. It's just been unrelenting Tory bashing. But it's not actually coming from me. Well, a bit of it is, to be fair, but a lot of it's coming from you guys at home. What does that say? I suspect it's actually, ironically, because it's not quite Conservative enough for plenty of you. Silly what, though. Michelle Dewberry's up next. Jubes & Co. will be with you for the next hour. Michelle, what have you got on for us? Yes.
Hello, Patrick. Yeah, I've got to say, I do take a bit of credit, actually, for Rishi's 5-point plan, because anyone that watched my show on Monday, that's what we did. We came up with a 5-point plan for Rishi. 48 hours or so later, he's come up with his own, so I'm fascinated to see what the viewers make of it. Are they impressed by it or not? Will he actually deliver or not? This whole notion of maths as well that you were just talking about, Patrick. I mean, it blows my brain. How are you going to make kids up to the age of 18 sit and learn maths if they don't want to? Fine for those that do, but everyone, really? I want to get into that. And the bonfire of Brexit regulations. Where are we at with it? Where should we be at with it? What are the concerns around it? And MPs wearing stab vests. Is that essential or is it a little bit too far? I want people's thoughts on that.
Oh, Michelle, it's going to be box office as per. Make sure you stay locked in front of your screens here, right here on GB News, for the wonderful Michelle Dewberry, who will be with you for Jubes & Co. very, very shortly. Thank you very much, everybody who's tuning in to me throughout the course of this 3 hours. Massive reaction, of course, to Rishi Sunak's big 5-point plan. I'll be back covering for Stein 8 till 9. I will see you in a tick.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Mild for most of us through the next 24 hours. One exception, northern Scotland overnight, but it then turns cloudier all across the UK into Thursday with outbreaks of rain in some spots. We've got a brief interlude between weather systems, one low moving away to the east, one low approaching from the west. And in between, some clear spells with winds easing as well. So clear spells for the Midlands, eastern England, northeast Scotland, and actually it's across northeast Scotland with those clear spells and with lighter winds that we'll see a touch of frost first thing Thursday. Showers generally in the north easing overnight. They'll take some time, but eventually most places will be drier. But we look to the west, where Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest will turn cloudier with some outbreaks of rain by dawn. Those outbreaks of rain move across the country. The cloud thickens across all parts after a bright start in the east. And it turns milder with these winds freshening from the southwest. So 11 to 14 Celsius generally first thing Thursday afternoon, and 5 to 6 Celsius for the northeast of Scotland, where here it's a bright afternoon until the rain pushes in by the end of the day. And that wet weather sweeps across Scotland and Northern Ireland during the afternoon, but it moves into England and Wales during the overnight period. Clears the southeast by dawn on Friday, so for many places it's wet overnight and then it's drier again by dawn on Friday. Clear spells for the southern half of the UK, but very windy further north with gales for western Scotland, especially for the northwest, where 60 to 70 mile/hour wind gusts are a possibility early on Friday. The winds do ease through the day. Showers at first eventually start to ease as well, but only a brief gap once again between weather systems on Friday, because more unsettled weather returns for the weekend, mostly in the form of showers.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.